Welcome in to Check the Mic. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We are live on YouTube, and it's time, Sam, for one of my favorite shows every year. It's the Reason for Optimism for all 32 NFL teams. We started this a couple years ago. You weren't even invited to it when we first started this. You were on vacation, right? And you know, I was like, I'll get somebody optimistic on here, and then we dragged you into it last year, and you countered a couple years ago with the Pessimism show. Took me out of it, and now we're combined, right? Me usually a little more optimistic, you usually a little more pessimistic. We're gonna do that this week. Optimism and pessimism for all 32 NFL teams.
Yeah, hit both the yin and the yang.
How you doing? You want to get right into it? We'll talk later.
Yeah,
Mother's Day.
Sure. It's all 32 teams. That means we're already against the clock. You and I, we always struggle when it's 32 to be in anytime under like 8 hours.
All right, well, let's do it. We're gonna go team by team here. A reason for optimism. Sometimes I go off the rails and I turn every team into a Super Bowl winner. We'll see what happens here today. So let's do it, man. Let's start with the AFC East. We're going to go division by division. We'll start with the Buffalo Bills. Right into it, Sam. Reason for optimism for the Bills. What do you have?
Simple. Same as every year. You start with Josh Allen. You start with a pretty good roster. You are one of the Super Bowl contenders. And I think the Bills deserve some credit for kind of staying the course, right? They didn't do anything dramatic or crazy in the offseason. They didn't, take the approach of clearly we have hit a level and something dramatic needs to change in order for us to get over this hump and, win in the playoffs and get to a Super Bowl and win a Super Bowl. They have taken more of the approach of, look, we're close, right? And the most important thing is to keep being there every time in January. We've already shown we can beat the Chiefs in the regular season. It hasn't broken our way yet in the playoffs, but that doesn't mean it won't. Sometimes the coin can just come up heads 4, 5, 6 times in a row. It doesn't mean the coin is broken. It just means that's the way it is.
On the pessimism show, I'll probably talk about how it's like, man, we keep doing the same thing. We keep losing to the Chiefs. We'll mention that in a minute, but the other thing I'll add on the optimism part is last year at this time, we were talking about, hey, they're getting younger. It's a reset. Is this going to be, a step back before they take a step forward? Is this more of a long-term play? And they were just as good last year, and they were just as close to making it to the Super Bowl. And I think they'll be even better next year after last year's reset, or at least they have the opportunity to be. And the other thing I'll add is what we raved about, or at least I raved about during draft time, is their defensive line depth. The fact that they went into the draft with really one starting position open, and they seemingly filled it in the first round with Maxwell Hairston. I like the way they've built this roster. No apparent holes. You could argue about X receiver this or whatever it may be, but they scored over 30 points per game as before Billy Bean calls in and tell Brandon Bean, not Billy, before Brandon Bean jumps in and calls us, right? So, yeah, there's a lot of
mad at people calling him Billy.
He does. Oh, I'm sure he does. I wonder if Brandon will come join us on the show here. Anyway, reasons for optimism in Buffalo. Plus, I also feel like last year they started to Josh Allen wins the MVP. Ironically, in the year where it felt like they were winning more games without just leaning on Josh Allen, right? So they continue to get incrementally better in the Josh Allen era, even though it's not showing up in a Super Bowl appearance just yet.
Yeah, I mean, they were supposed to be kind of rebuilding last year. I think people expected them to take a bit of a step back, and they didn't. They were every bit as good, if not better, than before. And that means they have a lot of young guys that are ready potentially to take that next step forward. So, again, the reason for optimism for Buffalo is they are one of the contenders. They are a well-run organization. There are very few holes on this team. I mean, heading into the season, they are one of the best rosters in the NFL with one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Ergo, you're automatically a Super Bowl contender.
Super Bowl champion is what's happening. They're going to win it. It's Optimism Day, Sam. Bills, your 2025 Super Bowl champs. All right, let's go on to the Miami Dolphins. Reasons for optimism for the Miami Dolphins, Sam.
Well, immediately this gets an awful lot more difficult. I'm going to say, look, I'm not making every team into a Super Bowl team. Even the optimistic case for some of these teams is not Super Bowl. Miami, it's tougher. Like, this is not nearly, I think, as good a situation as it is in Buffalo. But the reason for optimism is, they have Tua, they have Mike McDaniel. We know what that combination can do when things are firing, and it can create an extremely explosive, potent offense. The other reason for optimism is the offensive line could go back to not being a problem, right? Like maybe Patrick Paul, the player that they drafted a year ago to come in and, be the successor at left tackle. Maybe he'll be that guy. And immediately they're able to just have a succession plan at left tackle. Last year, the offensive line suddenly became a problem for all these Shanahan offenses, Houston, Miami, San Francisco, all of them to varying degrees. Suddenly what was a weak offensive line on paper looked like a weakness going into or during the season. Maybe that was a one-year thing. Maybe they'll go back to being able to hide those offensive lines, and Miami's weak link on paper won't be a weak link.
I'll spin it this way. For a team that's been very fast, and I called them more of a front runner type of team the last couple of years, where when they're beating up on a bad team, that's what they do. They beat up on bad teams and struggle to beat good teams. I think they acknowledge their weaknesses, right? When they would run up against good teams and maybe struggled in the trenches, struggled on the offensive line, struggled on the defensive line, particularly on the interior, spending their first 2 draft picks on Kenneth Grant, Jonah Savanier. I mean, maybe that's the reason for optimism, is now you have this team that is explosive. You still have Tyreek Hill. You still have Jalen Waddle. You have some of that explosiveness on the outside. You have Devin Achane. So you've got the big playability, but now you've got this acknowledgement that we have to be a little bit tougher in the run game on both sides of the ball, and they're moving in that direction. So that's how I would position the optimism here for the Dolphins, even though on the pessimism show, it's going to be easier to say, hey, the depth is depleted. We'll have some fodder for that. But I'll say that the reason for optimism, by the way, isn't always just for this year. It's about the trajectory. And we could say that the acknowledgement that the trenches needed some work has maybe Miami moving in the right direction here.
Yeah. And look, as much as Tua is an unexciting quarterback sometimes because I think his limitations are clear, but that's not to say he's not extremely effective within this offense when it's going well. Like, Tua's had stretches where he's had 90 plus PFF grades where he's looked like one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the NFL. Just because he's not capable of doing the Josh Allen things does not mean he's not capable of executing this offense and making it, one of the most explosive and potent in the league.
All right, next up in the AFC East, the New England Patriots. Reason for optimism. They'll be better than last year.
Yeah, a lot better, theoretically. So this is a good example, right? The Patriots' optimistic outlook does not include Super Bowl, in my opinion. But it does include significantly better than being the worst team in football a year ago. You have the quarterback. You've got Drake May. That's the single biggest thing that you need to get done. You changed coaching hires and you went from Gerard Mayo, the anointed successor. We've now gone to a proven commodity in Mike Vrabel, who I think a lot of people say was a very good coach and was kind of unfortunate with the way things ended in Tennessee. So I think you've upgraded at coaching, and then they spent this offseason upgrading the rest of the roster. Free agency was a lot about defense. The draft, you upgrade at left tackle with Will Campbell. You upgrade at receiver with guys like Kyle Williams coming in. You upgrade the pass protection, even if it's a running back with a guy like Travion Henderson, the best pass blocking, blitz pickup running back in the draft. And, you can paint a picture where this offensive line could come together and not be great, but be solid. The receiving core could come together, again, not be great, but be solid. Stephon Diggs is in the building as well, coming off that knee injury. And all of a sudden, Drake May has weapons to throw to, has a bit more protection than he did a year ago. And the team as a whole is significantly better coached.
Yeah, I think it's an easy one, right? Drake May looked really good last year as a rookie relative to the circumstances. You add in Vrabel, you add a lot of pieces on both sides of the ball. Certainly reasons for optimism here. We'll temper it on Thursday when we talk about pessimism and say, well, we don't know how all those players are going to merge together yet. But it's optimism day. So, the big free agent signings of, Milton Williams and Carlton Davis, those are going to work, right? They're going to work. The draft picks of Kyle Williams and Jared Wilson and Will Campbell, they're all going to work, right? They're all going to be there. You've got several new starters on a team that, by the way, won 4 games each of the last 2 years, both with Bill Belichick and with Gerard Mayo. who just got fired after one and done. So there's absolutely reason for the Patriots to feel more optimistic going into this year, with the foundation being, I think they at least found the quarterback of the future, right? I mean, Drake May wasn't like he dominated last year, but as we've talked about, looked like an awful situation. He held his own. He handled pressure, made some big time throws, made some boneheaded mistakes, but the totality of it was like, all right, this is a guy to build around. Can't wait to see what happens when he has some offensive linemen, some weapons, a defense, and all those things I think are moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I, again, couldn't be more impressed by Drake May last year, given what was around him. The key for this offseason was about upgrading what was around him. Maybe they overpaid to make that happen. You know, they were throwing money around that other teams weren't willing to go to, with the Milton Williams deal, for example. But we've said before, sometimes you need to do that, right? Sometimes to get the thing, to get the shiny object in the auction, you need to go to wherever the money is. And they had the money to spend. They had to spend it somewhere. They threw a ton of money at guys like Milton Williams, and that's been a big upgrade on the defensive line for them. So, you know, the optimism for the Patriots is they are moving in the right direction, and hopefully with a significant step, not just a small step in the right direction. This will be a big leap this year.
All right, let's go. Last team in the AFC East, the New York Jets. Reasons for optimism for the Jets.
Well, a reset, I think, is the reason for optimism. You're no longer waiting for this Rodgers drama thing to play out however it's going to play out. You got rid of that. You're like, look, it didn't work. It was a roll of the dice worth taking, in my opinion. Like, Rodgers is a Hall of Fame quarterback. He is one of the best to ever play the game. Even at his age, coming off an Achilles, I think that was a gamble worth taking. And it didn't work out. And okay, sometimes that happens. You take a shot, you miss. But rather than double down, like, they could have been drawn to that again, right? They could have said, look, he was that age coming off the Achilles. We've got a new situation now. Let's go. Let's do it again. We're not going to find a better quarterback than Rodgers. It would have been easy to do that for a new group. And instead they went, we're not interested. We're moving away from Rodgers. And then, they had a kind of tricky spot, right? They weren't necessarily positioned at the very top of this draft to go get a quarterback. The free agency group is what it is. Justin Fields, Tyrod Taylor, I think, is a pretty good duo of quarterbacks to go through a season or two with, right? To, like, let's see if we can make this work. Fields is, I think he has potential to be a lot more than that, but we know he's got a pretty solid floor of, like, we can make a running offense work. We can get him incrementally better as a passing threat. We've got good weapons with guys like Garrett Wilson in the building. Like, we can make this function. And then let's try and make the rest of the roster as good as we can. So I think process is the optimism for the Jets. Like, for the first time in a while, this has looked like pretty good process.
Yeah, I'm with you, by the way, and we could unpack this maybe on a later show, but the decision to go get Aaron Rodgers, even though it didn't work out, I agree that it was a move worth making, because what was the alternative at that time? Honestly.
And remember, by the way, one of the alternatives was Derek Carr, which, if anything, worked even worse, right? Like, Derek Carr has basically had to retire off the back of how well that move worked for the Saints. Like, that was one of the alternatives that people were talking about when the Jets were kicking around the Rodgers thing, or like, so what was your alternative? Well, there was no right answer that offseason. So I say, why not?
Yeah, and the reason for the Rodgers thing is the upside certainly felt higher than the Carr upside, and the Carr move, which we do need to discuss his retirement at some point here. The Carr move felt better for the NFC South than it did the AFC East. When you're trying to compete with teams that are better than you, it just didn't work out for the Jets. And I like that they've moved on, reset the whole thing. Darren Muji's in as general manager, Aaron Glenn in as head coach. They have some work to do to get the roster moving in the right direction. I thought they did, though. They made the right, I think, first draft pick with Amon Membu at right tackle. So yeah, that would be the optimism, is the reset, getting the new regime in there, and moving on from Rodgers and getting into the future here. And I think we'll see if they're positioned for a quarterback next year. As I've said, I'm going to continue with this offseason. I think Fields is going to sneakily win a few more games than we expect from a Jets team that feels like they're rebuilding. But that would be the reasons for optimism, is the whole organization reset right now.
Yep.
All right, we're an eighth of the way through the league. I think we're doing all right. Good pace. NFC East, the Dallas Cowboys, who will be playing, by the way, breaking news today, playing the opening game September 4th, Thursday night, So Thursday night, September 4th, against the Philadelphia Eagles. It's the Cowboys and Eagles on opening night. Reasons for optimism for the Dallas Cowboys here, Sam?
Well, okay. I think people malign Dak Prescott a little bit unfairly, but remember a couple of years ago, he was pretty close to being the MVP. I mean, he had the strongest statistical case for MVP a couple of seasons ago. It ended up going, because it's like a vibes award, it ended up going in a different direction, and not unreasonably, because there's something to the vibes thing. Like, when did you put up those stats?
Yeah,
Who did you
really.
put them up against
Before somebody calls you out and say that Lamar simply won on vibes, Dak dominated bad teams, was bad against good teams, relative.
But like,
and it was the right play.
Dak was better than Lamar, right?
Yes.
It's vibes plus the other things that aren't captured in the statistics, like the strength of competition and those kinds of things. And Lamar, every time he played the best competition, he had his best games, whereas Dak, the opposite. So yeah, it's not that there's no substance to it, but it is a vibes-based deal, as opposed to statistical hard evidence that people are working from. It's like, well, I remember him cooking against the 49ers on prime time. That's going to count in my head. Anyway, point being, Dak Prescott is capable of extremely high level play. Like, there's multiple reasons why he is paid the way he is, one of which is, ineptitude from the front office. The other of which is he's actually a very good quarterback, and he plays at his best when you surround him with a bunch of weaponry and let him go to work. And they have done some of that. So obviously you already have CeeDee Lamb. Now you got George Pickens in the building. Whatever about what kind of a pain in the ass that guy is or has been, and how long it's going to hold together, George Pickens is a huge upgrade on the field. If they can keep him pulling in the right direction, George Pickens, along with CeeDee Lamb, along with, the Jalen Tolbert, Jalen Brooks, Kevontae Turpin, like, they've got players now that Dak Prescott can go to work with. The offensive line, those were young guys, right? Cooper Beebe, rookie, thrown in there. Tyler Guyton, rookie, thrown in there. Tyler Booker this year, rookie, going to be thrown in there. These young guys should be able to get better going forward. If they can get the offensive line to a decent level, the receivers are good, Dak Prescott can make that offense work.
So you got playmakers. You have obviously some playmakers on the defensive side of the ball with, Trayvon Diggs, Micah Parsons, like what they did on day 2 of the draft with Chavon Revel in the 3rd round, Donovan Ezeraku in the 2nd round. So yeah, there are reasons for optimism in Dallas. You throw in the Brian Schottenheimer factor, and of course he's inexperienced. Dallas was the only team to really interview him. But the thing I always try to remind people about Schottenheimer, I don't know how he's going to play out as the head coach. He was the offensive coordinator when Russell Wilson had probably his best season in 2019, right? He was part of not even rejuvenated Russ, but like peak Russ before things fell apart, which was post-Shoddy, by the way. He was also a part of that Dak season that you're referencing, right? He was offensive coordinator in name. Mike McCarthy was calling plays, but Schottenheimer was... So he was adjacent to the best we've seen of Russell Wilson, the best we've seen of Dak, right? Calling plays for Seattle, and then the OC in name for Dak. So that's the other thing that I'll say. Schottenheimer taking over as head coach. Maybe he is a secret genius and has been, a part of these really good offenses and has been a key cog while Pete Carroll was getting credit or Mike McCarthy was getting credit. So there's that element. And look, on the pessimism show, I'm going to say he's inexperienced. He's never been a head coach and no one else interviewed him. Spoiler alert for Thursday. But if we want to spin it positively, with Schottenheimer, that is truth here. So maybe that is the spark that this offense needs to even take the next step here.
Yeah, and that whole Russell Wilson Schottenheimer kind of era should probably be revised a little bit now, like with the Russell Wilson evidence since then, right? At the time that was kind of peak let Russ cook era, and part of the Schottenheimer thing was like, well, why don't they ever unleash him? Why don't they let Russ carry the load? Like, really go to town. Look at how good he is. And now maybe, look, doesn't always work that way. Guys age, they don't end up the same. The situation changes. But like, you could definitely rewrite that now to say, actually, that was the way of getting the best version of Russell Wilson. And had they let Russ cook, it wouldn't have worked the same way. And actually, he deserves a lot more credit for persisting with that approach on the offensive side rather than giving in to the clamor to let Russell Wilson do more within the offense, including presumably from Russell Wilson. I would imagine he was lobbying for, I can do more. Let me do more. And they were like, no. Settle down, Russ. Like, we got it. Don't worry. So I think Schottenheimer probably is a pretty good voice to have trying to point Dak Prescott in the right way. He's not the same as Russell Wilson exactly, but I think he's probably a decent bet to understand how to get the best version of Dak Prescott.
Last thing I'll add on Dallas, a lot of times we look at the offseason, and when it doesn't feel great, and let's be serious, the last 2 offseasons for Dallas haven't felt great as far as what they've added. You forget sometimes that the foundation is really strong. And the foundation in Dallas is strong with Dak, playmakers, defensive playmakers. The foundation is still strong. So even if they don't have the most aggressive offseason in the world, they'll still be good. And so I expect Dallas to be much better next year on the Optimism show here. New York Giants next in the NFC East. Optimism certainly centered around Abdul Carter, Jackson Dart, all of the talent, Malik Neighbors, all of the talent that they've added these last couple of years.
Yeah, well, so I think the Giants have had generally a really good offseason. And it depends exactly. Like your optimistic outlook would have to include Jackson Dart. There were a ton of people that really liked Jackson Dart and thought he was, one of the best quarterbacks in this draft, maybe QB2. And every step of the offseason process, there seemed to be people coming out of whatever event it was, Senior Bowl, Combine, going, man, Jackson Dart lit it up. Now, I wasn't one of those people. I didn't quite see what other people did, but they saw it. So, and it's the same thing. I mean, look, say it's training camp, mini camp, rookie, whatever it is. But like first time he steps on the field, there's Giants beat reporters being like, man, that guy just throws the ball. It's amazing. It just leaps out of his hand. Like I didn't see that. I'm not sure. Maybe this is just when you like a guy, that's what you see.
Stay optimistic. You got to stay optimistic. Come on.
So
Come on,
the
man.
Optimistic, every step of the way, there have been people wowed by what Jackson Dart can do. And he was incredibly good. So if they've secured their QB of the future by trading up, not having to do it at number 3, by getting, arguably the best defensive player in the draft in Abdul Carter, and then coming back into the first round and getting Jackson Dart and securing the QB of the future. Well, now you're going somewhere. You've got Malik Neighbors. You brought back Darius Slayton. You've got that incredible draft class from a year ago, all of whom look like they're going to be, useful contributors, plus players. You've got Scattaboo being added to Tyrone Tracy in the backfield, giving you the most phenomenal thunder and lightning 1-2 punch in football, added to this stewardship of Russell Wilson at quarterback, Jameis Winston there in case Russell drives it off a cliff, and then Jackson Dart waiting to develop in the wings. Perfect process.
I mean, the optimism might just be Jameis coming. I mean, the number of sermons that they have, the pregame speeches between Russ and Jameis. I mean, it's going to be like a speech off before the game. Who's gonna rally the troops? Jameis is going to be like jumping in. It's going to be great. The optimism is going to be through the roof just because of the QB room. The other thing that I'll legitimately add here: first time Brian Daboll theoretically has his guy. Right. So sure, they re-signed Daniel Jones, and you could say maybe that was a declaration that Daniel Jones was their guy, because in year one, they got the best season out of Daniel Jones back in 2022, year one of Brian Daboll. First time he's been able to actually draft his quarterback. And by all reports, some of the reports were that maybe the front office was in on Shedeur and maybe the coaching staff was out on Shedeur, and that the coaches, Daboll in particular, probably wanted Jackson Dart. So this is the opportunity for the head coach to get his guy to build around. So definitely reasons for optimism. If you're a Giants fan, whether it's the head coach and GM going forward after this year or not, I do think they at least have some really, really nice foundational pieces. And they also might, when the in listicle season here, Sam, people are going to list the Giants as a top 3 defensive line. Maybe a defensive line even better than the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. So that's a reason for optimism. When you add Abdul Carter to Dexter Lawrence to Brian Burns, you're looking at Darius Alexander in the 3rd round. You are looking at one of the best defensive lines in football on paper.
Yeah. And, a guy like Paulson Adebo coming in free agency as well. They've hopefully upgraded the secondary. Like, the defense could be really good. And the offense, it's not about this year for them. Like, the offense is about the future with Jackson Dart. This is an offense set up for him to come in, develop, learn from the sideline, and then take over. And if they've got the right guy, like the Giants should be pointed in the right direction in a serious way.
Philadelphia Eagles up next, reigning Super Bowl champions. Let's try to find some optimism for the Eagles.
Pretty easy, I think. They're really good. They won a Super Bowl. They didn't get significantly worse in the offseason. And if anything, you can say, look, they improved in a couple of areas. Therefore, they've got to be. I haven't looked at the actual odds. Where are they favorites for the Super Bowl again? They've got to be in the top 3.
I don't know if they'd be favored because there was a little bit of turnover. It does feel like the roster, they said, okay, we're going to let some stars go. We need to leave, let the Milton Williams and Josh Sweats of the world go. Honestly, I think part of the optimism for the Eagles isn't even necessarily for this year. It's that they just added a ton of draft picks. They're loaded with draft picks for next year. It's that they have a very good roster. They have a very good foundation without a mortgaged future, right? Like when the Rams won their Super Bowl, you knew that a reset was coming in the near future, and it did. The next season, I believe, it was. So there's no real reset coming for the Eagles, except maybe like this 2029 when all the the cap hits are like $9 billion or whatever it is. You're set up for the foreseeable future here in Philadelphia with Howie running the show. And yeah, you lost Kellen Moore to a head coaching position, but you still have good coaching foundation, player foundation, front office foundation. The organization's just set up for sustained success.
Just Google the odds. FanDuel was the first sports book that came up. They have them as the favorite. Guess who's second favorite, interestingly?
Bills.
No, they're third.
Chiefs.
Fourth.
Second, the Lions?
Fifth.
Ravens, then. Ravens.
Yeah, Ravens.
Okay. So the Ravens leaped, because usually the odds, you just go with like, oh, it's going to be a Super Bowl repeat. That's how most people just feel like we're just going to put the 2 Super Bowl teams in there. Ravens jumped up, huh? So, yeah, I mean, Eagles are easy. Plus, you're Super Bowl champs until next February. You just ride in that high.
I mean, look, they are the reigning Super Bowl champs. They have one of the best rosters in the NFL. They had a good draft. The offseason was solid. There's no reason why this team should not be one of the contending teams, the best team in the NFC, or one of the top 2 best teams in the NFC. The reason for optimism is you are the Super Bowl favorite.
All right, let's go NFC East to wrap it up. Washington Commanders, reasons for optimism.
Yeah, and a shout out to John Wick in the chat, taking a break from, revenge, presumably, shouting out Washington earlier on. Washington's reason for optimism. Well, you found the quarterback last year, and you didn't just find a guy who looks like a good, viable starting quarterback. You found somebody that looks like a future MVP and has already demonstrated as a rookie the capacity to not just go toe-to-toe with better teams, but to actually carry your team, beat teams that are better than you on paper in the best or the biggest situation in the playoffs, and, really drag a team that shouldn't have been there to a really, really high level. So you found that guy, and now you've made the situation around him better. You went and traded for Laramie Tunsil, one of the best pass blocking left tackles in the NFL. Is he perfect? No. Does he come with flaws, penalties? Sure. But it's a huge upgrade over what was there a year ago. Deebo Samuel, you traded for him for a low draft pick as well. Again, is he what he was at his very peak? Maybe not. Do you need him to be? No, because he's a huge upgrade regardless. So the situation around Jaden Daniels is an awful lot better than it was last season. And he was already, absolutely cooking as a rookie.
Yeah. I mean, when we just raved about the Eagles and a lot of their foundation that's in place, I think, how could you not be optimistic about the Commanders after finding Jaden Daniels with year 1 of Dan Quinn, with year 1 of Adam Peters running the show, the new ownership, just the entire direction of the team moving in a positive way. Now, look, it's the Optimism show, so I'm not going to talk about how maybe they're not going to be a Final Four team next year, right? Like realistically, they're the classic team that will be better, maybe week to week, and maybe not have the right results. So my level of positivity here is going to be on the long-term outlook here. I think from ownership to the GM to the head coach to the quarterback, they're built to be good for the foreseeable future, to compete with the Eagles, to compete with the Cowboys. I think we're looking at the NFC East maybe getting up into that best division in football territory very soon if the Commanders continue their success, which again they're set up to do. I think Jaden Daniels is a star already and a future MVP candidate, as I've said, future MVP. So yeah, the Commanders are not only they're not a one-year wonder, right? They overachieved last year getting to the Final Four. They surprised some people, showing that they belonged, getting to the Final Four. I'm not saying they're going to I'm going to say they're going to the Final Four and beyond this year. It's the Optimism show. But they're set up to be in that competition, to win the NFC East, to make a playoff run every single year now.
And I think they showed last year they're a well-coached football team as well. Like Dan Quinn was a bit of an unknown as a kind of retread coach. I think people, I don't know if people correctly assigned credit, and I'm not blaming other people, like we may have done it as well. But for the first stint he had in Atlanta, where it's like, yeah, the Falcons are really good. They're a contender, but also like Kyle Shanahan is the offensive coordinator. Like how much of this is him versus Dan Quinn? Like they were a good football team, and Dan Quinn probably didn't get the credit because he'd assembled this like superstar coaching staff underneath him. He then went to Dallas and did an amazing job with that defense. You know, it was the reason Micah Parsons is one of the best edge rushers in the NFL now, as opposed to some dude playing linebacker at who knows what level, presumably pretty high, but I doubt he'd be a defensive player of the year candidate every given season if he was playing off the ball linebacker. Dan Quinn was what facilitated that shift by recognizing what he had. Like he did a really good job of playing to the strengths of the personnel. And then when he goes to Washington, he hires another sort of superstar staff. He goes and finds Cliff Kingsbury, who again, was a kind of question mark. He had his shot at head coach, hadn't necessarily worked out. He comes back and Kingsbury puts this offense around Jaden Daniels and is able to do remarkable work there as well. So I think they've shown last season that this is a very well-coached football team on top of the talent that they have now.
All right, let's move to the AFC North. Baltimore Ravens, as you mentioned, the number 2 odds behind the Eagles to win the Super Bowl. Reasons for optimism for the Ravens here, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, similar to Buffalo, right? You are one of the favorites for the Super Bowl. You start off with Lamar Jackson. You start off with John Harbaugh. You start off with this incredible nucleus. And they had a good offseason. Like they always have one of the better rosters in the NFL. I think they've done a solid job of adding to it. And there's no reason the Baltimore Ravens won't be one of the contenders this year.
I mean, they're going to feel like the Bills, where the goal is obviously beat each other, beat the Bills, beat the Chiefs. How do you beat the Chiefs? And you can't sit there and just rack your brain every single offseason. How do we overcome? How do we win the AFC? How do we get past the Chiefs? Just continue to make good decisions. And the Ravens, I think, continue to do that with, having the head coach quarterback combination there. Lamar Jackson coming off probably his best season, right? His best season, a season statistically that was way better than his MVP season of the previous year. And so I think Lamar continues to get better and better, took better care of the ball last season, maybe the best that he ever has as far as turnover-worthy plays. It sounds weird, but they lost in the divisional round to the Bills because of all the turnovers and, fumbles and a drop pass by Mark Andrews. Those are like, they're fluky plays in that they're not common. They did it. They deserve the blame for those plays. But if they played the Bills again, they have a chance to beat the Bills and beat the Chiefs and go to the Super Bowl to play the Eagles. So I think they're in just really good shape, with Lamar seemingly getting better, right? While maybe Mahomes isn't getting better at this point, Lamar continues to, add a little bit more to his game. So, the Ravens are well set up here.
Yeah, division round losses are funny because sometimes they can be an indication of, like, sometimes the division round is when you run up against the best teams and you sort of show that you're not in that category, right? Like, just to conclude, like Houston last year in the division round, when they lost, it was like, okay, that was Houston's level. They were good enough to like get through a game or just get to the next level. And then when they hit the real good teams, they're not at that level last season. Baltimore, sometimes though, there are just more elite teams than there are pathways through to the championship game or the Super Bowl. And you end up with 2 of them meeting in the division round, and it's a, really close game, but neither team, like either one of those teams could not just progress from that game, but could win a championship game and could be the team in the Super Bowl. That, I thought, was what we saw in the Baltimore-Buffalo game. Like, they lost that game. Mark Andrews drops a pass that he normally catches I don't know what his strike rate of bringing that ball in, but it would be extremely high. I would be very confident if you freeze frame that pass, and the ball is like a yard out from Mark Andrews' hands, and you ask somebody what happens next. Does he catch it? Yes or no? Knowing that it's Mark Andrews, you would put a lot of money on him catching that football, and he doesn't. Does that mean the pass was perfect? No, but they should have caught that ball. They should have had the touchdown. Like Baltimore went out of that by effectively one play. That team could have won not just that game. They could have won the next game. They could have been in the Super Bowl a year ago. We saw the fantasy football combination of Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry in the same backfield. It is as exciting and as special as you hoped it would be this time a year ago. The reasons for optimism are clear. This team is capable of winning a Super Bowl, even if they haven't done it yet.
The Ravens are similar to the Bills, Sam, where I would say the last two seasons for both teams have been the best under Lamar Jackson at quarterback, Josh Allen at quarterback, even though neither team won in the AFC Championship. Neither team made it to the Super Bowl. But the reason for optimism is they continue to get better. I still think they're right there, couple plays away. They'll be good. They'll be great again next year.
And by the way, so going into that game, probably specifically, like Lamar Jackson, I think, was battling this narrative of, well, he doesn't really play well in the postseason. There were turnovers in that game, but Lamar Jackson played well, particularly in the second half. And again, put the ball in effectively the hands of Mark Andrews on a play that should have given them the lead and the win. They didn't get it. Like, I think that game kind of exorcised that narrative of Lamar Jackson doesn't show up in the postseason. That was an impressive play, an impressive level of performance from Lamar Jackson against a very good team. He was phenomenal the week before in the wild card game as well. Like, that was the best postseason that Lamar Jackson has individually posted, which I think is probably important.
Let's go Cincinnati Bengals here. Reasons for optimism. I mean, just having Jamar Chase, T. Higgins locked up with Joe Burrow coming off of his best season. That's a good place to start. Yeah,
they brought the crew back, right? We know that that Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins. We know that trio provides an incredibly good offensive foundation, right? It almost doesn't matter what else is around them. If you've got those three guys together, you can make something work. And, even last year, terrible defense. And they really should have made the postseason if it wasn't for the one game where that group didn't show up in week one, where weird stuff happens against the New England Patriots. If they had that win, if they just found a way of getting over the line there, this group would have made the postseason, and they would have been a terrifying out for any of the elite teams that had dramatically better defenses, just because they knew that group could keep pace on the other side of the ball. So they brought that group back. They spent the money where it needed to be spent. They kept the crew intact. And that alone is a reason for optimism. The second reason is the defense can't possibly be as bad as it was last season, even without massive overhauls on the personnel side. Like, just by giving it another shot, they won't be as bad as they were a year ago. They've made the change, defensive coordinator. They fired Lou Anarumo. He carried the can for the performance, but simply running another season back, that defense will be better than it was a year ago, and the offense should be as good.
And they finished 9-8. And I know you could do this for every team, but how many times do we go back and say a blocked field goal, a missed field goal, this thing in overtime? Like, they were literally 4 plays away from 12 or 13 wins. And again, you can't, they didn't make those plays. But when your whole season, just like with the Ravens, when your whole season comes down to a fumble here and there and a drop pass here and there, those are rare type of plays. You deserve the blame for those, but those are rare. So if things play out in a similar fashion this year for the Bengals, if they won 13 games, are you surprised? No, I'm not, because they were right there last year despite that defense.
Yeah. And I don't think you even need to kind of run the theoretical counterfactual of, they could have won 13 and been one of the contenders. If you just look at it and say, look, let's say they have that one more win in week one, or, the last of the things that needed to break their way. Remember, like 58 things needed to happen for the Bengals to make the playoffs. 57 of them happened, and then one didn't right at the death. Imagine that last thing happened. They finally sneak it in. The point is, even at 9-8, there's not nobody would have been shocked if this team had managed to actually make a run and get through the playoffs, right? They would have been less likely than Kansas City, Buffalo, Baltimore to do it because the defense was garbage and they're not as good. But had that team actually got on the run and made it through at that point, the way they were playing, it wouldn't have blown anybody's mind. So, like, that's the important part. It's that even with like a terrible side of the ball, this team was still dangerous. They were still terrifying for the contenders in the AFC, and they could theoretically have gone on a run and you know, knocked out everybody in the playoffs and been in the Super Bowl. So looking this year, they brought that group back, and the defense is going to be better because it's a new year and they shouldn't have been as bad as they were a year ago.
All right, let's go Cleveland Browns. Reasons for optimism for the Browns. It's much like the Jets one, right? We're out. Well, not out from under Deshaun Watson yet, but you at least know he's not going to be playing football for you next year.
Yeah, and it's the process thing that's encouraging. Like we can debate exactly what the process was for Shedeur Sanders, given, you know, the way the draft panned out. But if you just look at the results, right? If you just say they didn't force a quarterback at the top of the draft, they actually traded out of that spot, picked up a first next year, where they're in a much better position to get out from that Deshaun Watson contract once and for all. Like, they are now positioned for next year's quarterbacks. And if they didn't love this year's, the kind of correct Moneyball strategy, if you like, is punt on quarterbacks, take two cheap rolls of the dice, which they did in Dylan Gabriel and then Shedeur Sanders later on for a third and a fifth round pick. You pick up the first rounder next year so that you can go get the quarterback next season, and you've bought yourself time to get through this year, right? Theoretically, nobody should be fired at the end of this year because you're going to roll the dice on youth. You're going to see what one of those two young guys can do. The team around him is still pretty good. Like, they've done a reasonable job of kind of keeping a roster intact. So I think this is all around good strategy. Now, will that result in this team being a contender this year? I wouldn't have thought so. But the encouraging thing, the optimistic thing is they didn't do like the desperate thing, right? They didn't do we have a desperate need at quarterback. We've just got to take a guy at 3 we don't think is worth that spot. They did the kind of smart thing. They did the business approach, the mathematical approach, the financial approach. And they said, we're probably not going to be great this year, but this is the best thing for the future of this team.
Yeah, the optimism has to be a multi-year view here. And Sam, when we ranked quarterbacks, by the way, we both put Shedeur at 2, and I think we both had Dylan Gabriel at 4. So if you look at it and say, well, they just drafted, for whatever it's worth, 2 of our top 4 quarterbacks from this draft and have a first-round pick for next year, where the class probably should be better. And so they have a chance to do this high-volume draft approach. The same thing we were like, hey, the Falcons over-investing in quarterback. Love seeing this because it's so important to find your guy. The Browns, and again, the way we got there with taking Shedeur in the 5th, it's not like this was this grand plan on paper. Like, oh, we're going to get Shedeur in the 5th. But the way it's fallen, the ability to maybe draft 3 quarterbacks in 2 years just to find one, I do love that from a process perspective for the Browns, who had some cap plus roster draft deficits to overcome, and I think they're all pointed in the right direction.
But even the Sanders thing, I think, is good process as well. They effectively said, we are passing on Shedeur Sanders, period, right? We don't think he's worth a top draft pick. If you believe what they're saying, and the way they drafted says this is true, they ranked Dylan Gabriel ahead of Shedeur Sanders. And even if that's because of the off-field stuff, right? It's the meeting room, the interviews, like if it's that stuff that turned them off Shedeur Sanders, whatever it is. The point being, generally, it seems like that's true. Even if that's true, they then said at some point it's worth the gamble, right? There's no, like in the 5th round, there's no risk essentially attached to this anymore. Like if we drafted this guy in the 1st round, we don't think there's any chance he turns into a good player, or not any chance, but not a high chance. And that feels like a waste of that pick. But in the 5th round, there's also an awareness we might be wrong, right? What if we're wrong and he's actually good, right? He was the consensus 2nd quarterback, right? He ended up there, QB2 on the consensus still. So like, what if we got it wrong and the consensus is right? A 5th rounder is worth hedging just to check, right? Just to make sure we're not the ones wrong and actually everyone else is, right? That's good process. That's how it should work. Understanding that as much as you don't think he's the guy, the realization that you might be right they effectively bought that insurance policy for a 5th-round draft pick, which I think is really smart way of doing things. And if they're right, if they are originally right that actually Shador's not the guy and he may be a problem and blah, 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 you can cut a 5th-round draft pick this year. It doesn't make any difference. It's not a third. It's not a second. It's not a first. It's a 5th rounder. 5th rounders get cut all the time. Does that make it a good draft pick? No. But I think that's a really smart way of using a 5th-round draft pick effectively as an insurance policy.
All right, man, let's wrap up the AFC North with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Reasons for optimism. I think I know how I'm going to spin this one, but do you want to take a shot?
Okay. Aaron Rodgers is still out there. Aaron Rodgers is the most likely quarterback, I think, to be starting week 1 for the Pittsburgh Steelers still, even though he's not on this roster. And Aaron Rodgers is still a Hall of Fame caliber quarterback who was actually playing better football than he was given credit for last season at his advanced age, coming off an Achilles injury. I think it's entirely plausible that Rodgers could play better in 2025 than he did in 2024, even though he's even older at this point in his career. I think the load will be taken off his plate a little bit in this offense should he sign with the Steelers. And I think there's definitely a world where like efficient, play action Rodgers relying on the run game in a year removed from injury is actually a better version of Rodgers than a year ago. And Mike Tomlin has already shown he doesn't need elite quarterback play in order to win games, in order to have a winning season. Tomlin plus Rodgers. There's no way it could go wrong.
No way it could go wrong. I mean, that's where I'm going with this is Rodgers. It's not Rodgers bringing Nathaniel Hackett. It's not Rodgers.
Yes.
Well, I was going to say not bringing Alan Lazard until I realized, well, they just traded their number 2 and Alan Lazard is still out there. So the fact that like Lazard's coming in for death by 1,000 slants soon. But Rodgers with Tomlin, Rodgers without his offense, without his preconceived notions on how things are going to run. He's going to run Arthur Smith's system. Arthur Smith got the most out of Ryan Tannehill. We're still going to work with that one. Arthur Smith got the most out of Tannehill. He brought Ryan Tannehill to the AFC Championship as offensive coordinator. So that's how we're going to roll with this one. Rodgers plus the rest of the Steelers roster, I think looks pretty good. I think they've done a nice job building that roster up. Maybe receiver needs some help. Offensive line still has some questions. I think the defense could be really good. So that's where I'm going with the Steelers.
The Lazard's still with the Jets, so they would need to trade for him, and that's been rumored. All right. The best thing Tomlin could do though is like right out of the gate, right, put his foot down and be like, "We are not trading for Alan Lazard. Like, you come in, you're doing it our way, Aaron. Right? We are the only place available for if you want to start football games this year, or if you want to be the starter going into this year. But you're doing it our way. Like, we're not doing any of this Nathaniel Hackett." Aaron, the GM stuff. You're coming in, you're playing Pittsburgh football. We're running the ball. You've got DK Metcalf. We'll try and find you another receiver, but hey, don't overlook Roman Wilson. This guy can do stuff. He just missed his rookie season, but we're not trading for Alan Lazard. Like, we're not doing that. So suck it up, Aaron. Like, deal with it. That's the best thing that Tomlin could do right away. Like, immediately put the stamp that we are not doing this Aaron and friends thing again. It's Aaron and the Steelers.
Best team Tomlin's had since 2008. How about that? There we go. Since the Super Bowl. Our NFC North time. Detroit Lions, reasons for optimism. Starting with their fan base, who we know is the best group of fans in the NFL.
A way to just piss off the other 31 fan bases.
Most fans they're going to fast forward to their spot, right? So you're going to click the link. You're going to listen to what your team is. I should say this for every fan base. They're going to think I love all of them equally.
Similar to the other contending teams that we talked about already, they're really well set up. They're in a good position already. They've had another smart, kind of clearly, visibly sensible offseason where they've attacked potential areas of weakness, not even let them get to areas of weakness. They added offensive linemen in the draft as contingency, even though they don't necessarily need them to start. They went and got DJ Reed in free agency, even though theoretically they had the young guys from a year ago. You could have easily painted yourself an optimistic picture without DJ Reed and said, hey, they've got Terrion Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw from last year. Those guys are going to step right in, be the starters, and year 2 is when we're going to see the best of them. They insulated themselves from that. They went and got DJ Reed, so now they need one of Terrion Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw to start on the other side, and Amik Robertson's coming back. So, one of the best well-run teams in the NFL who's been a contender the last couple of years looks positioned to do exactly that again.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to go back and look at how they lost and everything too, kind of some earmuffs, Commanders fans, some fluky plays in there, right? I mean, they lost to the Commanders, but they're still very much set up. And the fact that the Lions were as good as they were until the playoff game, with all those injuries, they're another team the same way we were talking about. Hey, the Eagles are set up for the next few years. The Lions are set up. They set themselves up for sustained success here. They've done a nice job building the foundation of their roster. Continue to draft well. They're locking up their players long term here, and so the Lions are going to be good for the foreseeable future. Brad Holmes, Dan Campbell, trust in both guys. Lions are going to be back. Despite the coordinator changes, right? That'll be in the pessimism show. We'll talk about, hey, there's some questions in the coaching staff for the first time in a couple of years, because that was one of the biggest reasons for optimism last year. Was like, you just made it. What they lose in the they lost in the NFC Championship last year. They were up 3 scores in the NFC Championship. Brought the band back together. They'll be even better last year, and they looked even better last year for a big chunk of the season, given everything that they had to deal with. So they're still very, very good. So should still be very optimistic if you're a Lions fan.
Yeah, again, one of the best rosters in the league. The head coach is still there. The general manager is still there. Like, the key decision makers at the very top are still there. And most of the significant personnel, Aiden Hutchinson coming back off his leg injury, should be good to go again. That guy was on a defensive player of the year tear before he got hurt. Now, some of that was competition, but Hutchinson, if he'd stayed healthy, I think almost certain he would have won defensive player of the year, just because of the lead that he was racking up and the sheer undeniability of the absurd stats he was going to post by the end of the year based off the competition he was running through. And they lost him, halfway through the year and had to go in a different direction. But like, Hutchinson's going to be back. That they bolstered the interior. They might still need help on the edge, but there are players they can sign. Jadeveon Clowney got cut. Maybe he can come in as one of these late season or late off-season additions. The Detroit Lions should be contenders again.
How about the Green Bay Packers in the NFC North? Reasons for optimism for the Packers.
Well, again, they were one of the young. Were they officially the youngest again? But they've been basically the youngest roster in the NFL for like several straight years. And that means there's always an incredibly high ceiling of potential. Jordan Love, I think, is a very good quarterback. He was hurt basically all of last year, or certainly hampered his overall performance. I don't think last year is necessarily his baseline. I don't know that his baseline will be as good as it was the second half of the year before, but let's split the difference somewhere and say he's going to be between those two levels. Josh Jacobs, the backfield was impressive last year. The receiving core is good, even if it is lacking that true superstar number one. If you're painting the optimistic picture, Matthew Golden can be that number one guy. There are definitely people out there that saw that potential in him. He's a slick route runner. He's fast. He's efficient. He understands how to get open. He's got good body control. You can definitely imagine him becoming the number one receiver in this group. The offensive line should be good, and the defense is good. So they're a good team.
They're seemingly working things out with Jair Alexander, bringing him back. And look, this happens every year, right? In 2023, they surprised some people, right? Jordan Love looked like an absolute star down the stretch. We said, look, sometimes things regress a little bit with the quarterback. It's not always this complete upward trajectory. And so you would say last year was a little bit more disappointing maybe than 2023. Sometimes things work out that way, but it's very much the same group. It's similar offensive line, similar group of pass catchers. Jordan Love, yes, they added Josh Jacobs last year. I thought they showed that they could they could win a little bit with the power run game a little bit more than they had previously. And the defense took steps in the right direction with a big chunk of it coming back. So I think the continuity of Green Bay is absolutely a positive for them. Plus, in any given game or season, we've seen Jordan Love go on these runs where he is just unbelievable. And I don't even think they got that last year, right? So they didn't even get this elite stretch of play from Jordan Love, or even just very good stretch of play from Jordan Love, which I think he's capable of, which makes Packers are going to be tough to beat this year. And they won a lot of games last year. They were just a step below where the Vikings and the Lions were in their own division.
And I think they're another really well-coached football team on both sides of the ball. I mean, Matt LaFleur has done an amazing job on offense. He's starting to put together. Kevin O'Connell gets all the kind of headlines in terms of being the QB guru and the whisperer, but LaFleur's got a kind of similar track record when you look at it. He was the guy that was able to get the last elite play out of Aaron Rodgers. Remember, before LaFleur arrived, Rodgers had kind of been running it off the rails with Mike McCarthy. And there was the whole debate about how much of this is Rodgers declining, how much of this is Mike McCarthy's offense, and blah, blah, blah. LaFleur comes in, and it took a little bit of a time to forge that relationship. But then he got the best version of Rodgers again, and we got MVPs, and we got everything looking amazing. Rodgers goes, LaFleur brings in Jordan Love. Jordan Love was the guy that a lot of people did not like as a prospect because he was the latest in the line of this highly volatile, big mistake-prone type of guy. He gets this phenomenal play out of Jordan Love, albeit inconsistently. Love goes down. We get Malik Willis coming in. Malik Willis, the last thing we saw of him was being completely non-viable as a starting quarterback. LaFleur gets 2 wins and 2 impressive-looking performances out of him, and we go back to Jordan Love. Like, Matt LaFleur's resume, not just as a quarterback mind, but as an overall, offensive mind and head coach, is looking really, really good. The defense was massively upgraded with the switch at coordinator last year. This is one of the best coach teams, I think, in the league.
All right, how about the Chicago Bears? This one should be easy. Winning the offseason again, got a new pope coming from Chicago. I mean, lot to love about Chicago, but we just gave them one of our top 10 off seasons last week on our show. So arrows pointed up for the Bears.
Yeah, you got Ben Johnson. Let's start there. Ben Johnson has been the prize of the coaching carousel, the coaching cycle for the last couple of years, and he has kept going back to Detroit. Nobody's been able to tend into a head coaching job until this year. Chicago got it done. So Ben Johnson comes in. He's been at the helm of one of the best offenses in the league the last couple of years. He now gets to work with Caleb Williams, who was the number 1 overall pick, who was being talked about in elite prospect terms. He flashed some of that last year. It wasn't consistent, but now you get to pair that guy with Ben Johnson. And they didn't just stop there. They didn't just go, well, the pieces are in place. Now you got Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams. Let's go. They went to work and they overhauled the offensive line. Joe Tooney, Drew Dahlman, Jonah Jackson. Those could be 3 new starters just on the interior of that offensive line. Darnell Wright is there, but Ozzie Trapillo in the draft as well comes in as depth and competition. Braxton Jones has been pretty solid at the left tackle spot. So the line could be in a good spot. And they've got, receiving weapons from a year ago, but they also added to it. Rome Odunze from last year, DJ Moore still there, but you then go and get Luther Burden in the draft, Colston Loveland in the draft to add to that. This is a team with all the pieces for an offense that can absolutely cook.
Yeah, added defensive line depth, Grady Jarrett in there. So the defensive line looks like the best group they've had in a while. The offensive line looks like the best group they've had in a while. And we'll see how quickly Luther Burden and Colston Loveland hit the ground running. But on paper, that looks like a nice little group as well. Plus the Ben Johnson, Caleb Williams pairing. So I think, when you add it up, a lot to be optimistic for when it comes
Do we have an official word? Is the new Pope a Bears fan? Because they might be ordained now as well. So there's always that working for them.
I love the internet went and tracked him down. They know he's a White Sox fan. He was at the White Sox World Series in 2005. There's no other team in Chicago to root for, so I would assume he's a Bears fan.
Right. If he's a football fan, he's a Bears fan, presumably.
Has to be. Let's wrap up the NFC North with the Minnesota Vikings. I think I wanted to start with everything you said about Matt LaFleur. Like, the resume is looking good. The Kevin O'Connell resume, as we've raved about here, looking really strong with what he's done with Kirk Cousins, what he's done with Sam Darnold. Now he gets his guy, J.J. McCarthy, in there with a really good group on offense and Matt and Brian Flores' defense.
Yeah, so you start with JJ McCarthy. He was the guy that was supposed to be taking this team last year, and then the knee injury basically reset and delayed, and he got a mulligan. He got a redshirt year. But if you look at that draft class, 6 quarterbacks went in the first round. All 5 of them that started looked good, right, to varying degrees. He was seen as consensus QB4 in that group, right? He was generally seen as a step behind the Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels world, but he was seen as a step ahead of the Bo Nix, Michael Penix Jr. world by most people. That's kind of where he sat. If that's where he lands, right, based on who knows how that whole group is going to shake out over the next 5-10 years, but based off one season of evidence, if that's where he shakes out and belongs in that group, he will be a good quarterback immediately. Independent of the fact that he's going into this offense, it's just overhauled its offensive line that's already got Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson and Aaron Jones and, all these players to work with, and Kevin O'Connell, who's one of the best offensive minds and quarterback minds in the game. The situation is great for JJ McCarthy to step into, and the contextual evidence we have says that he should be good based off where he ranked relative to other quarterbacks in his class, all of whom were good.
When we talk about team building and strategies and everything, the brick by brick building of both lines from the Vikings perspective, right? Adding the 3 pieces on the offensive line this year, but now we're back-to-back years of Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel on the edge, Dallas Turner on the edge. That was last year. Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave this year. I mean, they have, if we're talking about blueprints and how you want to build a team on paper, I think Minnesota is doing it very much the right way. And this was 3 years ago when we talked about what Minnesota kept doing, which was being like just good enough to make the playoffs. And, there's not a next step in there. Now, Minnesota last year just made the playoffs and there wasn't a next step in there, but I think they've got the pieces to go even further because both lines looking much stronger, maybe the best group of pass catchers in the NFL. Does come down to JJ, but I think he has everything he needs to succeed. And for a guy that sat as a rookie and moved on, so with Darnold moving on and him taking over.
And on defense, that front 7 should be nasty. They added a couple of players on that defensive line, each of whom have been like top 5 pass rushing defensive tackles. And that's been a weakness of this team for a few years now. Javon Hargrave, Jonathan Allen, they're not coming off their best play necessarily, but you don't have to go back that far to find both of those guys looking like absolute dominant forces. Now they're together on the same defensive line, along with Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel. And Dallas Turner is going to take a step forward in year 2 because he was a non-factor really as a rookie. Like that front 7 should be a really impactful group for the Vikings.
Hey, we're halfway through every team. Reasons for optimism here. Let's go to the AFC West, starting with the Denver Broncos, Sam. Reasons for optimism for the Broncos.
When you look through this Denver Broncos roster, all of a sudden looks really, really good. And I think they had a pretty solid draft. Once the Sean Payton, Bo Nix combination, once they got going, was really flying as well. Like Denver, not even sneakily, just they, I think, are heading in the right direction pretty quickly, even before this offseason.
Yeah, the thing I'll say, too, we talk about their roster, and we've raved about it this offseason, how they feel like they're in a pretty good spot there. It's because of how they've developed, right? I mean, it's because of how they've developed a guy like Nick Bonito and Jonathan Cooper on the defensive line, the way they've drafted, maybe not even the flashiest drafts, but when you look, it's like, wow, they're deep on the defensive line. They're getting a ton of pressure. Pat Surtain's locking it down on the back end. The pass catchers, I think, could improve, but they got the most out of those guys. They had, Vele as a 7th rounder catching passes from Bo Nix. And that's the other piece. I think just the progression of Bo Nix. And I thought the comfort level that we saw with him down the stretch with Sean Payton is huge. That is probably the biggest reason for optimism. I think we saw the best of Sean Payton in the second half last year. Best we've seen in quite a while. To the point where we went into the draft saying the Broncos don't have a ton of needs. Draft the best players. You're in a really good spot from a team building perspective. So look, it's the optimism show, so I don't even have to say maybe the results might not be as good as last year, because I think the entire AFC West is competitive. I think the Chargers and the Raiders are going to be tough to beat, and of course the Chiefs, I don't think are going to be much worse than last year. So it's always going to be tough to repeat. But you've put as a Broncos fan, you should be excited about what they've put the spot they've put themselves in, both sides of the ball, plus the way Bo Nix progressed last year.
Yeah, and the Bo Nix thing is obviously huge. I mean, he propped himself up last season for a while with his running ability, with his scrambling. But late in the year, him and Sean Payton seemed like they were on the same page and they were getting somewhere. You've got Cortland Sutton. They brought in Evan Engram, Marvin Mims. They were starting to figure out, they need kind of one more receiver to really emerge and become that threat. Maybe Troy Franklin takes a step in year 2. He was getting open last year, just dropping the ball sometimes. That didn't help. But like, with the way Bo Nix is progressing, the ceiling of this offense is very high. The defense is already really good. Like, overall, I think the ceiling for this Broncos team is very, very high.
All right, next up, Kansas City Chiefs. Reasons for optimism for the AFC champion, Kansas City Chiefs.
Well, obviously, like the other contenders, you start off with Mahomes, Andy Reid. The nucleus is there for this team to be a contender every single year. Broadly, though, I think they navigated what was a tricky offseason pretty well. They had a lot more holes heading into this offseason on paper than they've had for a while. And I think they did a pretty good job of either patching it back together again or bringing a lot of those players back. And they started, in a weird way by like trading away Joe Thuney. Like, well, that's a hole that didn't even exist. And you've created a new one by trading away one of your best offensive linemen. But it was obviously for a reason, right? That enabled them to keep Trey Smith. So it was kind of trade to get younger and on the offensive line and attack things that way. Jalen Moore is an interesting gamble on the offensive line. On the one hand, it's risky because there's a very low sample size of him being very good. On the other hand, it's probably a better roll of the dice at cheaper than like the Dan Moore going rate, right? For an offensive lineman who's got a lot more experience, but a much more defined ceiling of how good he can be. So that was a good move. They brought back a lot of important players for them. Marquise Brown, who we didn't really get to see the impact he could have last year, but I think the ceiling for him within this offense is high. You brought back a guy like Nick Bolton, an important player for the defense. Charles Omenihu on the defensive line. Their defensive draft or their draft period, I think, was arguably the best in the entire league with volume as well. So I really like the offseason that Kansas City have had, and the nucleus is already there for them to be a contender.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I mean, the big one for me is the receiving group. I think the fact that Rashee Rice, with his off-field issues from last offseason, I don't think those get resolved before the year, so he probably doesn't get suspended. He comes back off of his injury. Just having healthy Rashee Rice, Marquise Brown, and Xavier Worthy, I mean, it's almost the fact that they won so many games last year, despite the wide receiver injuries, essentially allowing Xavier Worthy to get a whole bunch of experience in different ways. Now that trio looks really strong. Again, depends on health, but that trio looks really strong. And then I'll just make something up and say, you never know if an offseason of working out will help Travis Kelce get his feet back under him. You never know if he's just going to work out and find the fountain of youth. But he didn't look great last season. But they'll have the pass catchers set up. So rewind last year, we're like, hey, the deep ball is going to be back in this offense. It wasn't, but in part because of the injuries, and I think they're at least set up to challenge throwing the ball down the field more. And they won despite not having that last year. So I think that's the other just reason for optimism. You say Mahomes, you say Andy Reid. They've shown they can win in several different ways. Of course, they didn't win the Super Bowl, but they just made it to their third straight Super Bowl despite injuries, a different playing style, relying on their defense more than their offense over the last couple of years. They've shown that they can win in several different ways. So they'll be right back in the thick of everything this coming season.
And it's easy to forget because of how that game went, but they were basically favored in that game. I mean, they were most people had the Chiefs heading into that game. Like, the narrative was kind of, either the Chiefs win comfortably or it'll be close. Very few people had like Eagles blowout as the way that game was going to go. So, you can look at it and say, well, that exposed significant weaknesses of this Kansas City team. But let's remember where we were going into that game. Nobody was expecting the Chiefs to get their ass kicked in that game. Like, they were going into their third consecutive Super Bowl, looking for a three-peat, and they were favored to actually make it happen. So even though they got exposed for weaknesses within that game, this is not a team that's a million miles away from being right back there again.
Let's go Los Angeles Chargers. Reasons for optimism for the Chargers. Year 2 of Jim Harbaugh, and they had a nice season, losing the playoffs in the first round, but it was a good first season for Harbaugh.
It was really good first season, really. And part of it was impressive because they started off the Harbaugh tenure with the classic kind of receiver versus protection question mark, right? Joe Alt versus a top receiver. They go Joe Alt, and they come back with Ladd McConkey later on. And McConkey was good, but he was basically the only guy that was within that receiving core. So they still needed significant help around Justin Herbert. First thing they do in the offseason, sign Najee Harris. They then doubled down on that in the draft. They draft Omarion Hampton in the first round. So the running game should have been absolutely turbocharged versus last year, where it was basically the cast-off Baltimore Ravens backfield, right? It was J.K. Dobbins off the back of 3 consecutive significant leg injuries. It was Gus Edwards, who just looked like he can't function outside of that Ravens offense. Like the jump between those two guys and Omarion Hampton and Najee Harris being a spelling back should be huge. They added receivers as well in the draft. Trey Harris is a really interesting player to add to that group. They should have a better situation around Justin Herbert, who remains a really talented and high-end quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I think my optimism here is that, remember early in the year, I know Herbert was hurt, but we were joking that he was having those J.J. McCarthy in college stat lines. They were winning games with Herbert throwing 25 times and running the ball. I still think there's just more in Herbert. I thought he did play really well in stretches last year. Obviously did not play great in the playoff game, but I think they can win through the air. They can win with the Harbaugh style of, pound the rock. I don't know if they're completely there on defense just yet, but they, as far as the trenches go, they had one of the best defenses last year. Great pass defense, right? So you've got this, we called it the Mike McDonald scheme, but the Raven scheme, the Michigan scheme, that was the new trend, and the Chargers bring that from Michigan, and they had a really nice pass defense. So I felt like call it a rebuild. They reset the salary cap. They lost some big name players in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Joey Bosa's out now, but they kind of accelerated their rebuild last year. So I thought I don't want to say overachieved, but they achieved. They accelerated things a little bit, and they're ready to do more in year 2 with the Chargers. Year 2 of Harbaugh, getting his guys in there, getting his style in there. And they've got the Justin Herbert to Ladd McConkey connection, which I think they can use to win in the pass game. So I think there's a lot to be optimistic for the Chargers.
Yeah.
Let's wrap it up with the Raiders in the AFC West. Geno Smith coming in, Pete Carroll coming in, Chip Kelly, John Spytek, whole new world here for the Raiders.
They finally got a quarterback. I mean, that's the first reason for optimism. They spent the last few years being the team that's been, standing there without a quarterback when the music stops and everyone else has got the chair. They finally go and get a guy. They get Geno Smith. And look, evaluations or opinions on Geno are kind of all over the place, but he's been a really good quarterback since he's gotten that starting job, since his career kind of got reclaimed from being this bust, really. And that doesn't mean he's perfect. He has a glaring flaw in his game, which is poor play in the red zone. And sure, that's not a great flaw to have as a quarterback, right? You have your worst play the closest to the scoring area that you can get. But it doesn't mean that he's garbage, right? Like, that's the thing. There's nuance to this. We can all agree that Geno Smith does not play like a particularly good quarterback in the red zone, and yet he is overall a good quarterback. I think those are not incongruous thoughts to keep at the same time. So it's a massive upgrade at quarterback from Aiden O'Connell, et cetera. It should immediately make them a good, functional football team. The offensive line's probably better than what he was dealing with in Seattle last year. Pete Carroll coming in to be the culture reset, I think, is a really good and interesting move for this team. And then they've started adding interesting players as well. Ashton Genty is a generational talented running back, like arguably the best running back prospect since. You know, you can go all the way back to Adrian Peterson in 07, but you know, whoever it is, Zeke Elliott, Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson, wherever you want to put him, he's in that category. Brock Bowers from a year ago already looks like a super talented, you know, generational tight end prospect, even if he's functionally a slot receiver, right? But he's a weapon. Like, he's a dynamic, difficult to stop offensive weapon within this offense. Jacoby Myers is a good receiver. Jack Besh now comes in, is a good receiver. And then they've added like talented rolls of the dice as well, like Dante Thornton Jr., like historical athlete, right? Freaky. No, very few players have run the 4.3 40 at his size in the last like 25 years, right? Similar sort of generational story in terms of athletic freakiness on the defensive side, where you get Darian Porter, the Iowa State corner, who's got this weird backstory as well. So they've kind of combined this interesting, like, we'll take really safe, high floor players, guys like Jack Besh. Besh, I think, is going to be good in the NFL. We just don't know exactly how it's going to work. And then guys like Darian Porter or Dante Thornton Jr., who could be nothing. They could flame out immediately, or they have like really high-end ceiling of what they could be something special. So they've got this fascinating combination of like very safe, high floor guys and like total shots to the moon.
I think you summed it up. I don't know much to add. Most interesting draft in the world, plus Pete Carroll and, you know, the whole, you know, the new culture, the new everything. Arrows pointed up. I think in the short term, they'll be competitive this year. I think they're going to be, whether it shows up in the win-loss record. When I say competitive, last year, didn't the NFL have the most close games that they've had in forever? I mean, the NFL is more competitive than ever. I think the Raiders will be more competitive this year than they've been the last couple of years, just by having the upgraded quarterback with Geno Smith, but then having Max Crosby, Christian Wilkins together, maybe for a full season for the first time. And then everything that you added, I think the variety of the players that they drafted that'll be fun. It's going to be a lot of fun for the Raiders. So arrows pointed up for the Raiders, just like every other team on the show. NFC West, we're going Arizona Cardinals first. Easy one for us, Sam. We said, hey, they need defensive line. They need defensive playmakers. They added a ton this offseason.
Yeah, they probably had the worst defensive personnel in football or in the NFL last year, and they've attacked that like up and down the offseason across the board. So they should be significantly better in that area. Like Walter Nolan, a guy with legitimate top 10 talent in this draft, a guy whose highlight reel looks like Jalen Carter's. You know, I don't think he was as consistently good as Jalen Carter, but like the high-end play is the same kind of immediate impact, instant domination, those types of plays. Josh Sweat in free agency, Baron Browning, if you buy into, and we have to because it's the Optimism show, he was saying he was dealing with like an ankle injury all last season. Baron Browning has shown high-level play in his career so far. So if Baron Browning's healthy this year, we're going to get a much better version. They brought back Calais Campbell, right? 38 years old, still one of the better defensive linemen in the NFL. The guy's still really good. Immediate impact for this group. You know, this team is and Will Johnson, you know, another guy that was first round caliber talent, really high end play in college. They've added talent like up and down this line. Dalvin Tomlinson, nose tackle, like they are stronger. They're better against the run. They're better as a pass rushing unit. They're better across the board.
Remember too, Kyler Murray last year. Remember he had like two of the best games that we had seen through 8 or 10 weeks. He was inconsistent, but you still see the peaks there for Kyler Murray. You get year 2 of him working with Marvin Harrison Jr., a solid offensive line. They also had these stretches where they were running the ball like crazy. I thought Arizona, my reason for optimism is the same thing I kept saying last year after reviewing Cardinals games. I always thought that they've overachieved under Jonathan Gannon. I think Gannon has done a really nice job as the head coach, despite the personnel issues. And now with better personnel, they could be really dangerous. I think that's my biggest underlying reason is the optimism for the Cardinals. I think 2 years ago when we talked about it was Kyler's hurt. We know you're not going to have him, so you can start thinking long-term. Well, now we're in that long-term, payoff phase where they They traded down. They were the team that traded for the extra picks they gave up Will Anderson, the Will Anderson pick, right? Traded down, got multiple picks for it. We're in the payoff phase here for Arizona, and I think this roster's in the much, much better shape, certainly than it was 2 years ago, even than it was last year. And that's my biggest reason for optimism here for Arizona.
And I think the weaponry on offense is good. It's just young and inexperienced. I mean, Marvin Harrison, if he can get on the same page with Kyler Murray this season, immediately that passing game like moves forward by a noticeable margin, right? The percentage that thing will move if those two can just get consistently on the same page is significant. Michael Wilson, I think, is a useful number 2 wide receiver. Greg Dortch is a great slot weapon. Trey McBride is one of the best receiving tight ends in the NFL. James Conner in the backfield, Trey Benson as his backup. Like this group has weaponry for Kyler Murray to play with. So I think the offense could be significantly better than last year, just based off those guys, spending a year together, the young guys growing and developing and just, evolving.
Let's go Los Angeles Rams. Reasons for optimism for the Rams.
Well, they brought back Matthew Stafford. Immediately, this team arguably was the closest in the NFC outside of Philadelphia to actually winning a Super Bowl last year. They gave the Eagles the best game of anybody in the postseason. I think the Eagles were the deserving victor in that game, but they weren't far away from losing. Like the Rams had a shot to get that upset and to make that happen late in the game, and didn't quite get it done. But they if they had won that game, right, the Rams could easily have beaten Washington, say, in the NFC Championship game, and then upset Kansas City in the Super Bowl. Wouldn't have been shocking, right? So they brought back Matthew Stafford, who's the most important player in terms of making that happen again. So their Super Bowl window remains intact. But they've also, I think, upgraded in the offseason, done a pretty good job of adding personnel where they needed to, even retaining personnel. Alaric Jackson was hitting free agency, coming out of that season at left tackle. They brought him back. The offensive line should be solid. The receiving group is solid, and they added Devontae Adams, so it should be even better than that. The backfield is talented. Kyron Williams, Blake Corum is the backup. They add Jarquez Hunter because they're never going to not add one of these types of running backs. And then the defense was dominant by the time they reached the postseason and has continued to add players. Poona Ford coming in. This is a group that could cook.
Yeah, the way the defense played down the stretch, everything that you said, but the defense playing as well as they did down the stretch, sacking Sam Darnold, 7 or 8 times in that first playoff game. They gave up some big plays against the Eagles, but kind of, they held their own in that game. But the defense the way they played, Stafford combining with now Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams. We just saw Sean McVay. I love what he just did. Showed the whole team Devontae Adams highlights. Right, here's your new teammate. Here's what he does well. Here's how he wins from the slot. I thought it was a great video that the Rams posted of McVay just showing, just the respect that he has for his new player in Devontae Adams, who, by the way, I think can still play. I think he can still get open and make an impact. And I think, he was the one dependable guy for the Jets last year with Aaron Rodgers down the stretch. So, there's a lot to like about the Rams. I'll also say high level for a team that hit rock bottom for whatever that is in 2022, the year after their Super Bowl win. They had a ton of injuries, dealt with a lot. They go into the 2023 season with just a skeleton of a roster, and they've rebuilt it through the draft. They've built it back up through the draft. The defensive line is young and on the upswing, with Jared Verse looking like a future star. They got the offensive line back in order. They found another star at receiver in Puka. I mean, Les Snead has done an outstanding job over these last couple of years, taking a Super Bowl team, and then having it fall apart, get older, and building it right back up again. So the NFC West, by the way, we talk about the Cardinals, the Rams, what Seattle's doing. The Niners, I think, will still have a good foundation. This is going to be a tough division, but I love where the Rams are right now on the upswing here. San Francisco 49ers, reasons for optimism here, Sam.
Trickier.
Well, look, it's relative. I mean, it's relative to where they were, right? It doesn't feel as good as where they were, But I'll start with Kyle Shanahan still there. He's still elite as a play caller and QB developer. Brock Purdy is still there. And I think Purdy's good. I think he's still the best quarterback that Shanahan's had since Matt Ryan. I think that's a fair assessment. I'm going to start there. Even if the pieces around them aren't the same as they've had the last couple of years, I'm going to start with that's a good starting point, I think, for the Niners.
Yeah, and I think, look, the weaponry is still there. I mean, George Kittle is still arguably the best tight end in the NFL. Christian McCaffrey is arguably as good as any running back in the NFL, even though he was dealing with injury. Brandon Ayuk is a fantastic wide receiver. Juwan Jennings showed last year when they needed him, he's probably capable of a lot more than they've kind of needed him to do in the past. It's just he's been stuck on a depth chart that's had Debo and Brandon Ayuk and other guys ahead of him. Ricky Pearsall's rookie season was kind of a write-off because the dude got shot before he got anywhere near the field. Like, he could be a significantly bigger and better player this season when they really need him to step up and now become a much bigger part of this offense. They cut and then re-signed Kyle Juszczyk, so he's still there. Trent Williams is still there. So like all these key elements, the real talent that they've had is pretty much still in the building. They traded away Debo, but they had kind of moved away from how much they were leaning on him anyway. So all the pieces are still there for this offense to be a dominant force. And again, same with Miami. Every year, other than last year, the Shanahan system has been able to kind of hide its offensive line deficiencies. If that simply goes back to being the case, the relative weaknesses on this offensive line may not be a problem.
For the pessimism show, it's going to be easier to maybe pick apart their defensive line turnover and everything. But if you want to skew it optimistically, Michael Williams, Alfred Collins, CJ West, 3 draft picks on the defensive line. We're 1 year removed from the Rams. I'm not saying these are equal players, but the Rams added 4 defensive line draft picks: Jared Verse, Braden Fisk. They loaded up on the defensive line. It was a big question mark going in. By the end of the season, all of a sudden it became a strength. The Niners could be in the same boat. Michael Williams, getting the most out of him. He's still young, long, plays the run really well. I think their run defense will be better with those additions with Michael Williams, CJ West, Alfred Collins, going to Nick Bosa. So they're in a bit of a reset mode, getting younger mode. And if nothing else, that's fun and reasons for optimism, right? That's the same thing we said. Oh, the Bills are resetting, and the Chiefs did it a few years ago. Like, some teams do it. You have to do that every couple of years. The Eagles have gone through it. We just talked about the Rams going through it. So just because it doesn't feel great and there's more unknowns than previously doesn't mean it's going to be bad necessarily. So we've got more mystery boxes for Niners fans than they've had in a while. That's part of the fun.
That's it. And look, the mystery box can always be the boat, and they might have 3 boats, right? Like, this is the thing. When you're in your like objective straight down the line analysis, you have to look at that and say, look, the chances are when you have like 3 rookies that are all expected to play significant snaps on the defensive line, the baseline of that, like the average outcome of that, is probably not great. But in the optimism show, you can be like, those are 3 guys. You know, Michael Williams was a consensus, top pass rusher, top edge defender in this draft. He's young, he's talented, he's got the size. He could be really good right out of the gate. We love CJ West as a run defender, could immediately upgrade that group. Alfred Collins could do it as well. Like, the optimistic outcome of that trio together is a better defensive front than they had last year, right? They've upgraded with that trio coming in and injecting youth and vigor to this defensive line, whilst Nick Bosa is still a dominant force. Like, the optimistic outlook is talking up that trio.
All right, let's wrap up the NFC West with the Seattle Seahawks and reasons for optimism for them. Let me start with this. If we were objective about the offseason and we said Geno Smith out, Sam Darnold in, DK Metcalf out, Cooper Kupp in, like in a vacuum, it might not be a win overall, right? But I'm going to start with, it sounded like Geno Smith wasn't going to sign there, right? They weren't going to come to terms. I think you talked about how the Chiefs navigated the left tackle situation. I think the way Seattle navigated to get Darnold, to get Cooper Kupp, the way they drafted, I think they navigated things pretty well. So I'll start with that. I like the foundation that the Seahawks have built these last few years.
I mean, if we're being optimistic, you would say they upgraded at quarterback, right? They upgraded and got cheaper. They
They
upgraded
brought, what did
because
he have? 40
Darnold,
touchdown passes last year, Darnold. Let's be completely objective here. Geno Smith has been a better quarterback than Sam Darnold over the last 3 years. Last year, Sam Darnold had a better season than Geno Smith has ever put together. I think both of those things are true.
yes, as long as you don't say that the last 2 games of Sam Darnold like drags him down. So, for example, Darnold's PFF grade was higher than Geno's basically until those 2 games, and those 2 games were bad enough that it dragged the overall grade
It did.
below Geno Smith for the entire season. But I think you can say, look, Darnold's season last year reached a high that Geno Smith has never hit. And if he's capable of doing that, if you think that's what he's able to do going forward, you got a better quarterback for less money this offseason. So it's entirely plausible. Like the Darnold season made no sense, right? We started off first couple of games, he's playing well, and we were asking, okay, let's get to week 3 because that's what we've seen before. And then once week 3 came and went, and he was still playing well. It's like, well, how long is this going to last before the wheels fall off? And the wheels didn't fall off right up until the very end, at which point we'd basically given up the idea that they were going to fall off in the first place. So, if he's capable of having that season again, you have a really, really good answer at quarterback, and you're not paying him a ton of money. And you drafted Jalen Milroe as the kind of insurance policy, the heir apparent in the future, the guy that you can develop on the sideline and maybe even factor into the offense as like having an athletic package, a rushing set, short yardage, whatever you want to do. You've got some things you can do to work Milroe into the offense while he learns from the sideline. You still got Jackson Smith and Jigba. Noah Fant is there. You drafted Elijah Arroyo, who's got legitimate, like, incredible talent as a receiving option at tight end. Cooper Kupp is a viable weapon. Torrey Horton, I think, is a nice compliment to Cooper Kupp and JSN. He fits into that offense as a missing skill set. That backfield is incredibly talented with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. They finally upgraded the offensive line with Gray Zabel. This is an offense that could work.
I'll add year 2 of Mike Macdonald as head coach and his system on the defensive side of the ball. I thought they showed signs in the second half, especially when after trading for Ernest Jones at linebacker, that they were starting to figure things out defensively. I think the Macdonald, that system has shown maybe that it needs 1.5 to 2 years to really hit its stride. So I think that's a reason for optimism, and all of the depth that they've added on the defensive front the last couple of years, including DeMarcus Lawrence, by the way. I thought DeMarcus Lawrence as a free agent this offseason, just a very underrated, good player during his tenure with the Cowboys. He felt like the guy the Eagles were going to bring in as a buy low and then, have a 12-sack season. Well, the Seahawks were the beneficiary there. So I think they have a sneaky good defensive front. I'm expecting Lawrence to make an impact, year 2 of Byron Murphy to make an impact. So yeah, I think John Schneider's done a really nice job in the post Russell Wilson era, which we're still, we're 4 years removed from that, but the post Russell Wilson era, building this roster back up. We'll see what happens with this offensive line. If they need more than a step forward, but Zabel's at least a piece in the right direction in addition to everything else that they've done. And look, maybe Sam Darnold, like after the Geno Smith first year, as data-centric people, Sam, we're always like, it's 1 year. 1 year sample size. Give me another one. Show me another one. Show me another one. And 3 years later, Geno Smith was very much the same good, solid quarterback for 3 years. Darnold could just be that guy, right? Because right now we're saying, well, he's with Kevin O'Connell and he's with Justin Jefferson. It was only 1 year. And he could just be the good, solid quarterback now going forward, much like Geno Smith was. And if that's the case, once again, Seattle's really, really competitive. And they did it. They did this deal with Darnold on the mid-tier quarterback. They didn't pay $50 million for it, which is another potential win here, establishing the mid-level quarterback contract, especially if Darnold is even, 85% of what he was for the majority of last season.
And we don't know what kind of lasting effect let's assume that there is a significant boost in Kevin O'Connell coaching and how he's able to kind of rewire quarterbacks and generally improve their level of play. We don't know if that has a lasting effect on those guys or even if that's a constant with every quarterback that he deals with. But it's entirely plausible that the work that Kevin O'Connell did with Sam Darnold will help him in Seattle. It's not necessarily that well, once he's away from O'Connell, it's just going to fall apart. It might have been like Kevin O'Connell put Darnold back on track, right? Remember, this was a guy that was drafted at the top of his draft, that was seen as a top prospect, that has all the tools. Vikings reporters last season, when he got to camp, they were all raving about his arm talent. Like, look at the way this guy throws the football. Like, that's all there. So it's just that his play, like the mental side of his game, had never been there for his time in the NFL up until getting with Kevin O'Connell. But maybe O'Connell just got him on track, and now we're going to see, an improved version of Darnold going forward, assuming he has the capacity to forget those 2 games at the end of the season.
All right, 2 more divisions to go. Let's go to the AFC South. Houston Texans. Reasons for optimism here, Sam. This is go ahead. This is a good one.
Yeah. Well, they shouldn't have been as bad as they were a year ago, I think would be the first thing. Like, CJ Stroud, even with something of a sophomore slump, still impressed, like still showed some incredibly good stuff when often his best play was in the sort of most disadvantageous positions, 3rd and long, you need a big play from the quarterback. Some of his best plays were in those situations, which is usually not the case for quarterbacks. It's generally a struggle. The offseason, they added weaponry. They had Nico Collins. He's great. They had Stephon Diggs, didn't work out because he got a knee injury. Tank Dell didn't work out last season because he got a bad injury. Well, they went hard in the draft. They brought in both Iowa State wide receivers, Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, to that group. Christian Kirk is there as well. Dalton Schultz, Joe Mixon. Like, this is a group that could be really good from a supporting cast situation. The question mark is obviously the offensive line, but there's no, like, that line should not have been anywhere near as bad as it was a year ago. Like, nobody was going into last season being like, this is a good situation for Houston, except that offensive line, which is just hot garbage. And yet that's how it played. So I would assume that group is going to be better than it was last year, even though they haven't done a huge amount to like overhaul the personnel. And Stroud, with that group of weapons, should be able to do really good things.
Yeah, I thought last year so much of the offensive line was handling blitzes and stunts and just, I don't know, they just weren't ready for a lot. And so that should be better from an offensive line perspective. Stroud he wasn't as good last year as he was as a rookie, but he was so good as a rookie. That was one of the better rookie seasons we've seen in the last, 10 to 15 years. We were raving about him coming out. So he still has that talent. He still has the ability to stand in there, throw the ball accurately at the intermediate and downfield levels. He's got the ability to win inside and outside the pocket. I thought that was one of the real surprises of Stroud's rookie season, was his comfort level outside of the pocket, or consistency making plays outside the pocket. So I thought that's all still there for Houston. And then the defense has just incredible potential. Deep defensive line, star power with Daniil Hunter and Will Anderson, star power in the secondary with Derek Stingley. So they have talent on both sides of the ball. They did not go into the draft with massive needs. Bringing in both Iowa State receivers to go with Nico Collins, to go with 1 year of Christian Kirk, whatever they can get from Tank Dell when he comes back in the future, hopefully. Loaded up at receiver. So it's good roster. Roster got better, I think, this offseason. We'll see what happens with the offensive line and juggling that and seeing if they're better, but I think they will be better. And we're talking about a team, by the way, that's finished in the final 8. Right? They made it to the divisional round each of the last 2 years with their with a first and second year quarterback. So we had high expectations for them last year at this time, because we said, hey, they finished in the final 8 and they add Stephon Diggs and they add Daniil Hunter. Everything's going to be better this year. It wasn't necessarily better, but some things were better. And so my optimistic view is the Texans put all of it together. Well, the offense of 2 years ago, the defense of last year, and boom, Super Bowl contender.
Yeah, the line's going to be interesting because they've effectively replaced 2 starters on that group. Laramie Tunsil is one of the best pass blocking tackles in the game. They definitely downgraded from an on-field personnel going from Tunsil to Cam Robinson. On the other hand, nobody in Houston was sad to get rid of Laramie Tunsil. Like, this is a notable and important thing that we have no way of measuring, right? He is being talked about, like, people use that term like locker room cancer. I think those are probably overstating things, but like, people were throwing around words like that for Laramie Tunsil, like not a good locker room presence. I heard him talked about as being a soft offensive lineman, gave up a ton of penalties, wasn't necessarily a plus run blocker. I don't know what all of that rolls up into in terms of like how much should you weigh that as a player versus his pass blocking chops, which are excellent, but it's definitely a factor, right? And it's a factor that isn't necessarily captured in a lot of areas for performance or grading or whatever. Shaq Mason at right guard. I mean, Mason was awful when he was out there. Like they moved on from him, and almost regardless of what comes in and plays right guard for them, it's an upgrade over the level of play Shaq Mason had. His play, the speed that it fell off from like one of the best right guards in the NFL to absolute disaster was remarkable. But I would say the net of those two things is we downgraded at left tackle and we upgraded at right guard, regardless of who comes in. But the important thing is, how does the unit play? Because the unit was the biggest problem last year. The personnel is not good, but it's not disastrous. It was the unit as a group was a complete mess. Picking up stunts, reading any kind of gap exchange, just reading protections, reading blitzes, utterly hopeless. If that improves, the line should be better than it was last year.
All right, let's move on to the Indianapolis Colts. Reasons for optimism for the Colts here, Sam.
They have a good roster, top to bottom. The biggest gap in the roster going into the draft was tight end. They fixed that with the tight end that everyone thought they would end up drafting in Tyler Warren. And now they have two rolls of the dice at quarterback instead of one. You know, if Anthony Richardson doesn't work out, Daniel Jones is here to steady the ship. If Daniel Jones doesn't work out, you've still got Anthony Richardson as the high upside gamble. So it is one of the better rosters in the NFL, I think. And now they have double the chances that they have a viable quarterback.
Yeah, the thing I'll highlight here is the ways they can win offensively, whether it is Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones. They're similar in that they can both run effectively, and I think you can add some designed run game elements for both, especially Richardson. They're different, certainly, in that Richardson is your boomer bust, big play potential, right? He had stat lines straight out of the 1950s last year, right? I'm 8 for 20 for 250 yards and 2 touchdowns, right? Daniel Jones is the opposite of that. But no matter who is out there, the various receivers that can win at all levels of the field, Alec Pierce, Michael Pittman Jr., Josh Downs, the tight end addition of Warren, who you said, Jonathan Taylor in the backfield. I think they can win in a whole bunch of different ways with the run game, at every level of the field in the pass game. They're tough to defend, is my point. It'll just take either Daniel Jones wins the job and you want to see more big plays from him, or Anthony Richardson wins the job and you want to see just more consistency from him. It's not even turnover worthy plays, like just accuracy wise, the same issues that he had back to Florida, plus whatever happened when he got benched last year because he took himself out of the game. But they're going to be tough to defend. That's my biggest reason for optimism, I would say, for the Colts. And then the secondary additions. They've added some nice pieces in the secondary. Travarius Ward, with Cameron Bynum to a pretty deep defensive line. As you mentioned, solid roster. It'll come down to the quarterback play, and there's reasons to believe that because of what they have on offense, there'll be a tough offense to defend.
Yeah, look, I think there's a pretty solid chance that Daniel Jones ends up either winning that job outright or certainly getting thrown in as a starter after a couple of games of Anthony Richardson. And you could easily argue that that is by far the best situation that's been around Daniel Jones in his NFL career. It's better receivers, better offensive line, and maybe better coaching than he's ever had before. And he's already earned himself an albeit, stretch, like a overpay of a $40 million a year contract. Like he already has one of those under his belt, and this could be the best situation he's had around him. So even though Daniel Jones almost certainly has a fairly defined ceiling in the NFL, I wouldn't overlook the idea that he can come into this roster and make it look pretty good and win quite a lot of games with it. Now the Richardson thing. Richardson is an interesting case study because there's a couple of things working against him, which would be the case anyway, even if he was playing out of his mind. Number one, I think that taking himself out of the game thing was damaging. Like that was a problematic thing for a leader of a football team to do. And the Colts sent that message by effectively benching him, McAfee railing about it. Like that had enough of a shitstorm attached to it that I think Richardson probably got the message that that's just not a cool thing to be doing. I don't think he knew that you can't do that at the NFL level, but he probably does now, right? So let's call that a young, immature mistake that he made that he's presumably learned from, and we can move on from that. The injuries are also a problem. Like, whether or not he'd been playing well, his injuries have reached the point now where, like, the first thing they said as a team where they started looking for quarterback contingency is he hasn't shown he can play 17 games yet, which is true. Like, even if he was playing well, he hasn't yet shown that he can actually make
in a row
season.
He hasn't played more than 3 in a row. Forget 17 total.
So whether or not he was playing well, they would be looking for some kind of backup contingency because they just don't know that he can be durable enough to survive like that. But then the other thing is his NFL career is 15 games old as a starter, right? We knew when we were talking about drafting Anthony Richardson that he was a work in progress. He was something of a project that we were drafting at the top of the draft because of literally unprecedented athletic tools. And even though that didn't necessarily mean, there was a group of people that said he shouldn't start at all right away, right? He should learn from the sideline. He should develop from the sideline. He can play in the future. There was also a group of people of which I was in that camp that said, I think he can start right away because he's mentally pretty far along. Like, he reads defenses, he understands where to go with the ball, and he's good enough as a runner that you can kind of prop him up and you can learn with the live reps, right? I don't think you necessarily need to bench him to teach him. The point being, he hasn't had that development yet. Like, he's only played 15 games because of injuries and because of all these other things. So he is still very young in his playing experience, right? So as much as I think, look, he's playing at a level that does not suggest there is necessarily a long-term future there, I wouldn't rule out the idea that he is still extremely inexperienced and we could get better quickly if he is able to stay healthy for a stretch and kind of put it together.
It's intriguing because I was going to take the other angle as well. Like, Richardson could get better at any given point here because of the inexperience, and Daniel Jones because of the supporting cast, and now this recent history. Maybe it's recency bias that we're buying into this. We have Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield, and Sam Darnold all coming back from, I don't know, not doing much to all of a sudden becoming having high-end starting seasons. So is Daniel Jones the next guy? Could be. Let's go Jacksonville Jaguars. Reasons for optimism for the Jags.
Whole new world. We got rid of Trent Baalke. We brought in the child with the hoodie, and everything's going well.
The child with the hoodie.
James
let's start with that's James.
Also highly qualified front office executive from the Los Angeles Rams.
Even though he's 34, he's 8 years younger than you. It is how old than me? Am I 42 now or 40? Oh, I'm 43. Shoot,
you're 43. I'm not.
Oh, losing track. So I'll start with this. Trevor Lawrence thrown to Travis Hunter and Brian Thomas Jr. I think that is a great starting point for optimism with the Jags. And their offensive line, it's okay, but they're at least all locked up for the next couple of years. At least there'll be some continuity there. Trevor Lawrence has a chance to finally tap into his full potential with that receiving group. Plus Liam Cohen coming in now. You have Liam Cohen coming in to run the show. And I think there were Doug Peterson, I thought, did a nice job early on with Jacksonville, just like he did a nice job with Philadelphia early on. Something happened with Peterson and his tenures with Philadelphia and Jacksonville where things just tapered off for a little bit. Like, there was never a next step there. Well, Liam Cohen's coming off of a great season. He just had Baker Mayfield's best statistical season as offensive coordinator in Tampa. He's got the pedigree of coming from the Rams. He has the pedigree of having the best season of Will Levis's career, which was back Levis's junior year at Kentucky. So Liam Cohen, Trevor Lawrence, Travis Hunter, Brian Thomas Jr., that's your reason for optimism in Jacksonville.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, look, that is a great group to work with. I love Travis Hunter as a complementary piece to Brian Thomas Jr. I think they understood late in the year what Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be capable of and like scaled up his sort of involvement to being like, you're going to be a number one receiver doing everything for us. If that's where they're going with this team, that offense could be amazing.
And then defensively, they were bad last year. I don't think they'll be as bad. they were bad. I mean, they were playing a ton of man coverage. Didn't really have the horses to do it. Didn't have a consistent enough pass rush, but I think they'll at least be better on that side of the ball this year. But the biggest reason for optimism here, I think, is what they have offensively. Call it a culture reset here too. I think James Gladstone clearly bring in hey, we want to get the right people in the building. Travis Hunter is the right person. As I've said before, everybody you talk to who's interacted with Travis Hunter just raves about him. So we talk about him, the two-way football player, him, the person in the locker room and everything. I think all of that's moving in the right direction in Jacksonville, Travis Hunter being a huge part of that. Good.
But I think a huge part of that optimism is, the regime change, right? It's shifting from what was a clearly defined strategy that wasn't working, right? Let's load up on freaky athletes and sort of high risk players, to this approach of what they've done so far, which I think is much more impressive. So again, like another one of these teams where I think just the process looks significantly more encouraging than it has previously.
All right, let's wrap up the AFC South with the Tennessee Titans. Reasons for optimism here for the Titans has to start with Cam Ward, getting him your starting quarterback, but also entire front office change. Mike Bergonzi comes in. A lot of turnover in Tennessee over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, start with the quarterback. You had Will Levis last year. You got Cam Ward this year. That should be a huge step in the right direction. Even though Ward has some plays on the Will Levis spectrum, he generally speaking is on the right side of that line in terms of risk versus disaster. And look, that's part of quarterbacking today's NFL is the balance between crazy high risk plays that you shouldn't be trying to make and amazing, paradigm breaking plays that only elite quarterbacks are capable of making that invalidates a defense, right? So if Cam Ward is able to consistently come out on the right side of those plays, that's why he's going to be good. Will Levis was not able to consistently come out on the right side of them, and in fact was consistently on the wrong side of them. Therefore, he was a bad quarterback last year. But that shift in quarterback is your reason for excitement.
And then I'll just add the shift in philosophy with the Titans. I think we talked a lot 2 years ago. They were in the middle of a rebuild, and then before you know it, DeAndre Hopkins or L'Jarius Sneed, a lot of the moves that Tennessee's made over the last couple of years were kind of contradictory, right? We're going to rebuild, but we're also going to trade draft picks for big name players. I think they're all in on this Green Bay, Chad Brinker, president now, Green Bay style, draft and develop, draft 9 or 10 times a year. They did it. They maneuvered the draft to add those extra draft picks this year already. So I think that's where the future is bright for Tennessee, not just getting Cam Ward. Okay, now we have our quarterback. It's going to be draft and develop from here on out. And I think you're going to see a lot more talent added to the roster, young talent added to the roster over these next couple of years with Bergonzi, the other former GMs that they've added in as consultants. They're doing a lot from like the top down, I think, in Tennessee that should give optimism for this roster building here.
Yeah, the backfield is incredibly talented. Tony Pollard, Tajay Spears, Calvin Ridley is a really good number 2. If we're skewing optimistic, Alek Ayumanor, the Stanford receiver, he's one of the few receivers in this draft class that does have that like number 1 skill set, which fits in perfectly with Calvin Ridley. Plus, he's the Travis Hunter kryptonite. He was the guy that wrecked Travis Hunter for like 180 something yards and multiple touchdowns when Stanford played Colorado. So if he gets to do that twice a season, he's already well ahead of the curve.
If Jacksonville plays Hunter at cornerback, you have a mismatch weapon twice a year in that matchup. All right, man, let's go. One more division. We're 7 out of 8 here. NFC South, starting with the Atlanta Falcons. Reasons for optimism for the Falcons here, Sam, has to start with Michael Penix Jr. and how he played down the stretch.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about it the other show, but Michael Penix Jr. in an extremely small cameo in terms of playing time last season, 114 dropbacks. In 114 dropbacks, he had 10 big-time throws. Kirk Cousins had 13 big-time throws in 485 dropbacks. So the sheer rate at which Michael Penix Jr. was dropping dimes last season was insane. His PFF grade was like 88. His His play looks spectacular, right? He opens up everything. I think that's the key element is let's not forget how pared down, restricted, and sort of tied up that offense was schematically in order to make Kirk Cousins functional, right? Kirk Cousins, this guy who has been a very good quarterback, but coming off that Achilles injury was simply not capable of doing a bunch of stuff they wanted to do if everything was on the table, right? Zach Robinson had to work from within, like, here's the stuff that exists now. Remember when Patrick Mahomes like wrecked his ankle, and the first thing that happened was he goes to the sideline and Andy Reid is like going through the playbook, like asking him, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? Like job one was figuring out how much of this book still exists and how much of it is already out the window. Zach Robinson had to do that with Kirk Cousins on the fly last year. Like how much of this I can't call anymore because he can't run it. Michael Penix Jr. immediately opens up the rest of the playbook. And once that happened, this offense looked dramatically better. So that's the reason for excitement is we're going to get to see what the offense should have been.
And I thought when Michael Penix was the quarterback, Drake London looked like an absolute star as their top receiver. Darnell Mooney, we know about his speed and downfield ability. Kyle Pitts is still playing football there, just throwing that out there. But the 1-2 punch, Bijan Robinson, another star at running back. Tyler Algier, too. The number of times that I came out of games last year being like, man, that 1-2 punch. I'm still a huge Tyler Algier fan. And they ran the ball effectively in their zone scheme last year. So they have all these weapons, all these playmakers. Michael Penix got the ball to those guys. And then on the defensive side of the ball, the pass rush was awful. And we have 2 first-round edge rushers, 2 of the consensus top 5 edge rushers, Jalen Walker and James Pierce Jr. Falcons got both of those guys. Don't worry about next year's first-round pick. They have both of them in the building right now. This pass rush should be much better as well.
Yeah. Like, I think you would assume that defense should be better than it was a year ago. They've upgraded the personnel. Those are incredibly talented young pass rushers. Plus Leonard Floyd, we know is a complimentary piece, is a good player. Yeah, that group you would say should be a lot better than it was a year ago.
All right, let's go to the Carolina Panthers. I mean, we could just go back and rehash our top 10 offseason here for the Panthers, but it starts again with Bryce Young, his development last year, and the fact that we weren't being extreme last year when after 2 weeks we were like, man, the Panthers need to start scouting quarterbacks. This was unexpected. Yeah. That's how bad he was. But as bad as he was early on, to me, that's how impressive he was coming back from his benching. So Bryce Young, adding Teteroa McMillan, adding some defensive pieces. Carolina certainly had a nice offseason. Yeah,
like his comeback story was remarkable last year. I mean, he was written off, and deservedly so. They weren't planning on benching him going into the year. Like we were optimistic for what Bryce Young could be this time a year ago. We were like, everything around him got upgraded. The offensive line should be better. The receiving core should be better. Dave Canales has got a good track record with quarterbacks. Year 2 of Bryce Young should be good, right? And then he started the season, and it wasn't even just good. It was worse than it was the year before. It looked utterly abysmal. He was lost. He was broken. It was completely non-functional. Andy Dalton comes in. Immediately the offense clicks. You're like, you've got to bench him. You can't play him anymore. Like he's just not working. There's no way through this to the other side. They sat him down. They eventually go back to him later in the season. And he looks like a different player. It was like he had been reset with the benching. He just looked like a completely different quarterback and was getting better. And some of the good play, came against, weakened opposition, but then some of it didn't. Like he was going toe to toe with some really good really good defenses and looking pretty spectacular. And if you kind of take away the couple of games that existed that got him benched and just look at his performance since he came back, like he ended up with the number 6 PFF passing grade last year for quarterbacks. Like get rid of those 2 crappy games that got him benched. From the point he came back into the lineup, he ends up with the number 6 PFF passing grade. His big time throw rate was spectacularly high as well. 7.8% is in the Josh Allen world. Like 2 quarterbacks last season that played that kind of snaps had a big time throw rate over 7%. And it's Josh Allen and Bryce Young. We got to see what Bryce Young can do. And it wasn't just like, oh, look, this can actually work. It was genuinely impressive.
And there were several times we had to come in and be like, why are we so impressed with this 140-yard passing outing? Well, look at these 80 yards that were left on the table on big-time throws that were dropped. And doing it with Jalen Coker, undrafted free agent, as one of your top targets, doing it with David Moore, 10-year veteran, as one of your top targets, was doing it without a great supporting cast. So Bryce Young is the start, I would say, of the reason for optimism here for the Panthers, because it just looked like Alabama traits, right? It looked like his college traits. You add Teteroa and McMillan to the mix now. Loved how they navigated the draft to get the two edge rushers, Nick Scorton and Prince Umanmielen. They spent some money for Trayvon Merrick in free agency, brought in the 3 defensive linemen in free agency, starting with Tershawn Wharton. So the defense got an influx of talent. The offense gets McMillan as a weapon. The offensive line, by the way, all returning and intact. Consistency and continuity on the offensive line is a big win. And then second year of Dave Canales and Bryce Young working together with all that optimistic play down the stretch there. So I think there's a lot to like here for Carolina.
Yeah. The offensive line should be really good again. The receiving core should be upgraded from where it was a year ago. The backfield is good. And Bryce Young showed last year that he's capable of really high-end play. And what I think is what's particularly important about that is at draft time, the people that didn't like Bryce Young, even if they were willing to acknowledge, the traits and the impressive performance, it was like, if you're that size, does that put a limit on how good you can be at the next level, right? Maybe you can be a viable starter, but can you be a really good quarterback at that size? Last year answered that in a weird way. Like after getting benched, when he came back, he showed that not only can he play at this level, but he can play at a really high level at that size. Like that's the important thing. Now the concern is only, well, at that size, are you only ever one hit away from being hurt? But like, again, remember this ironic world where statistically the bigger quarterbacks are the ones that are more likely to get hurt. And this is playing out. Like Anthony Richardson is the dude that's being missing every couple of weeks with an injury because he runs like a tight end and he throws himself into tackles. Like Bryce Young, the dude who's my size, has not been hurt particularly often because he understands that at my size, you don't throw yourself at a 250-pound linebacker. You're not going to win that collision.
You're way taller than him, Sam. Anyway, 2 more teams here. New Orleans Saints, reasons for optimism. I'll start with this one. Derek Carr, by the way, just retired this weekend. We didn't really get to break it down, but I think the biggest thing was kind of last year first acknowledging they're not going all in every single season. And reset. Right now, they don't have the lowest effective cap space heading into 2026. You know what I mean? Like a year out from now, they're resetting the cap a little bit. Maybe the Carr retirement helps that a bit too. There'll be some dead money there, but that'll help a little bit. Even though they went back and tried to bring him, brought him back this year. Moving in the right direction long term. I think that's the most optimistic part of the Saints heading into this year.
Yeah, taking a more conventional salary cap management approach than they have previously, I think is encouraging. And also doing it without having to make massive, you didn't need to fire people and say, look, in order to get this going in a different direction, we're going to need to get rid of everybody who was an architect over the previous thing. It shows that they did understand the way the salary cap worked before. They were just choosing to gamble with it because they had Drew Brees, reaching the end, and they wanted to try and do everything they could to win while they had him. Didn't work out. And so eventually you had some pain to suffer through. But now they've understood, we can get this thing fixed without, permanently acting like the salary cap functions this way. So, yeah, that's encouraging. The Derek Carr thing is good for, they did this kind of win-win compromise, right? Where Derek Carr gets to keep the $10 million bonus that they gave him recently. They're not going to come after him for it, even though he's just retired. And, you have the right effectively to reclaim that money. In exchange, the Saints are getting whatever it was, $20-30 million worth of cap and cash relief. They're not going to owe him $30 more million for a guy that they don't see as the future. And they get the salary cap relief because he gets off the books. So it's kind of a win-win for both sides in terms of that divorce. But it does leave them with a total question mark at quarterback in this sort of 3-way battle of young, non-first round quarterbacks that they've drafted of Spencer Rattler, Jake Haener, and now Tyler Shough. I would assume that Spencer Rattler sort of opens that competition in the lead, but Tyler Shuck is the guy they have the most investment in terms of a second-round draft pick. So you would assume that he's got the shortest pathway towards that starting job. But the optimism is young, talented quarterbacks. Spencer Rattler didn't look amazing last year, but it was in a bad situation. He's got athleticism. He's got an arm. He's got just perfect technique. Like, he's got one of the most aesthetically pleasing passing delivery mechanics in the NFL. It's just pretty the way he throws the ball. So, he's got some upside. Tyler Shuck, weird career arc, weird backstory, but had some high-end play last year. He's also got that, terrifying play on his resume, but he doesn't have many of them, right? So Tyler Shuck could be the guy.
Throw in Kellen Moore as the new head coach here, coming off of his Super Bowl win. And I think what Kellen Moore has done best is not necessarily have a style, but adjusted. He's gotten good years out of Dak Prescott, out of Justin Herbert, last year out of Jalen Hurts. He's shown that he can win multiple ways, run game, pass game. So I think Kellen Moore coming in, and the Saints just taking a more long-term approach, right? I think in the post-Drew Brees era, they were never that close because of the inconsistency at quarterback. They were never that close to where they were. It made sense during the Brees era, but now, again, building more through the draft. They had the fewest draft picks over like the 10-year period just before this year. So getting into drafting more in volume, building more long-term. That's my reason for optimism for the Saints, is just that slightly different approach here.
I wonder if that same sort of approach to the salary cap of, look, we've got Drew Brees on the back nine of his career. Let's try and maximize that window. I wonder if that shaped how they approach the draft as well, with the sort of over-aggression of going to get their guy, right? Like the Marcus Davenport trades, that type of thing. Like that sort of typifies we've got to be aggressive. We've got to maximize this opportunity. And actually, in the draft in particular, it leads you down a negative road. Like, believing your own ability to scout these guys is generally a bad approach, because you're not that much better than anybody else. And if you make a mistake, it's doubly impactful because you gave up multiple draft picks to make it happen. I wonder if simply not having that pressure of like having to go get an impact guy with Drew Brees because you've only got a few more years of him left, if that's just going to automatically mean they'll treat the draft better than they did, as well as the salary cap.
All right, let's wrap up the entire show. Team 32 out of 32 is the Tampa Bay Bucks. Reasons for optimism for the Bucks here, Sam.
Well, they brought the band back again. They kept a lot of the players that they were in danger of losing, and kept a really good nucleus intact for this team to do well again. Like, Baker Mayfield has settled, I think, now into this like high-level quarterback who maybe isn't elite, but is in the next group down. And then he's got weapons to play with. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin is back, albeit coming off his injury. McMillan is there. Now you add Emeka Ibuka in the first round. You've got Bucky Irving. You've got Rashad White, Sean Tucker. Like, the backfield is incredibly good. This is a good group of weapons and a pretty good offensive line. This should be a good offense within a division that is always there to be won until, one of these other teams sort of takes a significant jump forward.
Yeah, I think the continuity aspect of this for the Bucks, and hear me out, Bucks fans, because I've heard the feedback on this, because I've said multiple times, I feel like they're in better position now to beat the Lions and the Eagles, teams like that in the NFC. And then the response is they beat them last year. They beat those teams last year. I get it. They beat them last year in head-to-head matchups. But the Bucks weren't as good as them last year. They were a 10-7 team. The Eagles and the Lions were competing for the number one seed. The Eagles won the Super Bowl. They were not at the same level as those two teams. I know they beat them head to head, but I think the Bucks are more in position to beat them or to compete with them for the NFC. I think they're in better position if they can get similar play from Baker Mayfield with the pass catchers that they have, the continuity on the offensive line, some of the defensive line additions like a Hassan Reddick, and the continuity that they have on defense, right? This homegrown team, they've done a really nice job of drafting and developing and then sprinkling in free agents and re-signings like Chris Godwin where needed. And then contingency for Godwin's injury, bringing in Ibuka this year, who I think is going to be a fantastic NFL player. So that's my point on the Bucks here. When it's Baker Mayfield leading the show a couple of years ago, it's like, I don't know if they can, the roster might not be in position to win the NFC. They're good for the South. I think they're in a position now where the Lions showed some weaknesses last year. The Eagles have had some turnover this offseason. The Niners have fallen off, right? There's other teams on the ascent, but I think the Bucs are maybe closer to the top tier now, just because they're all coming back with this continuity on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, I think they're in really good shape, and it's an easier division to win than a lot of these other teams have to deal with. And they were, they didn't get destroyed by Washington in the playoffs either. I mean, they gave a good account of themselves before, even though they lost in the first round, and went home early. And as you said, they had beaten like the contending teams in the NFC at various points during the season. So, in part because the quarterback is Baker Mayfield and he's in that tier below the elite quarterbacks, you feel a little bit less good about them versus some of the contending teams. On the other hand, in the NFC, that's true for quite a lot of them. Like Jared Goff has a ceiling that's probably below that elite tier of quarterbacks. Even Jalen Hurts probably isn't in that elite tier of quarterbacks. So the best teams in the NFC generally are not, like the AFC is where the elite terrifying quarterbacks generally reside. The NFC is actually a lot more open, and a Baker Mayfield, if he has a good season, a good season of Baker Mayfield could actually put you at the top table in the NFC in terms of elite quarterback performance.
Well, that's it. All 32 teams. Reasons for optimism, Sam. Just over. I mean, wow. Look at this. Our script, our rundown had us finishing at 11-11. Now, I don't know if this was adjusted on the fly by producer Will. I don't know if he was like, change this. I don't know if this was the time earlier, but I think we had a perfect show. Nice. Perfect show. Sam.
Easy.
He didn't change anything. He said finish at 11-11, and we finished at 11-11. And then he also wrote down, remind everybody that we're live every Monday at 9 a.m. and Thursday at 10:30 a.m. 2 shows here during the offseason. And
so we are checking, we are getting feedback for whether that's what time people would like for the show to go. So if you are in particular a viewer, less so the audio, because that varies a little bit by how quickly we can get it up. But if you watch on YouTube, when is the best time for us to go live for these shows? If we were going to make them both go at the same time, would you like a 9 a.m. start? Would you like a noon start at 10:30, at 2 p.m.? Where would you be shooting for? We've got a poll up on YouTube. We've got a poll, I think, on Twitter out there as well. But email us in as well. Check the mic at the33rdteam.com if you have thoughts of when would be the optimal time to do these live shows.
And also,
we do the poll in the chat if we're equipped. If somebody's in the chat from our production side, we could run one right now.
We have the poll in the chat, but isn't it skewed by this is a 9 a.m. audience?
Yeah. I mean, it's not going to be necessarily, but all of these, they're all data points.
We have to adjust for competition. What mug is that for you, Sam, today?
That's the Parlor Donuts again.
Oh, the donut. Okay, you just showed me the other side. Yeah, I got my Sport Radar, second coffee of the day.
Since we've finished up so efficiently and early, should I tell my my pull-up story from the weekend?
Yeah, I was in. So yeah, not only was I interested in this, I was giving live play-by-play to Kelly while we were at the kids' baseball game. I'm like, Sam's in like a pull-up contest or something, and it's interesting stuff here.
Well, everyone's seen those videos, right? Where these guys, like TikTok videos or whatever, where a guy just has a pull-up bar out in the middle of nowhere, and they, do 100, like do X number of pull-ups, and if you win, you get he gives out money or whatever. So they had Scout was doing this 5K. My daughter was doing this 5K run locally, this big event, and they have like a kind of fair festival thing afterwards, like a party for all the people after the 5K. So she goes, sets off, and I'm like, all right, I got 45 minutes or whatever at her pace. I'm going to go find a coffee in this place because it was at 8 a.m. the start of this thing. I hadn't had coffee. So I went and found coffee, and I'm walking, and they had the Marines set up, right, with a pull-up bar, and they were doing that thing. So the guy in front of me gets there, and he was this guy in like his 20s. He's like, I want to see how many I can do. And he did 3. So I asked the Marine dude, I was like, what's the early pace so far today? And he's like, well, that guy's the first guy, so 3. I'm like, all right, I know I can beat 3. So I do 10 pull-ups. I'm like, I got 10. That's fine. I'm out of here. I'm out of here for the records. I'm just doing 10. And then I go drink the coffee, wait for Scout to finish. So then we're walking around the party after the 5K thing with all the kids. we go over to the thing to see if any of the kids can do pull-ups. And after that, I was like, what's the pace right now? And he's like, the record's 15 now. Like, I think I can beat 15. So I was like, all right, I'm going to try and reclaim the record. So I did 16. I'm like, yeah, I felt pretty good about that. And then the guy behind me does 27. I'm like, okay, that didn't feel so good.
16's impressive though. That's good.
So at the start, I did the 20-something-year-old guy does his 3. I do 10. And then the guy looks at me and he goes, man, it's funny. It's always the old guys that have got the real strength here. I'm like, wow, if I didn't know already, you and me we're officially in the old guy category now.
I love it because we had theorized if we are going to, have some fun at the end of the show and talk, it could just be talking about how much older we're getting. And that was just the perfect fodder for the reminder of how old you are.
Well, it was like
the old man.
It was 50-50, right? Because on the one hand, I can do 16 pull-ups, which not a lot of old people, I think, can do. And on the other hand, I'm visibly old because the guy's like, it's old man. It's always the old man that have the pull-ups in them.
I just want to say, when I was training for pitching, I only did chin-ups. We didn't do pull-up grip. We had to do chin-ups for the shoulders.
Yeah.
And I maxed out at 8 at about 277 pounds. So I'm proud of that. 8 chin-ups where long arms, probably got my 35+ inch arms, 277 pounds.
8 at your arm length and weight is absurd. Like there's a video somewhere of the Eagles defensive tackle that retired the last couple of years. Why am I blanking on his name?
Fletcher Cox.
Yes. There's a video somewhere of Fletcher Cox doing like full pull-ups at like 315 pounds or whatever, right? Yeah. That's insane. Like it's very much a weight-driven thing. If you are extremely lightweight, you have a very good chance of being able to do pull-ups. If you are heavier than you should be, you're going to struggle with pull-ups. I'm pretty light, so I can do some, but like I can't even imagine trying to pull 275 pounds in a pull-up.
My favorite part of that was the progression of the offseason. I would finish a baseball season. We'd probably start our training in, say, mid-October, late October, whatever it was. I would start the offseason doing like 1.5. Like you're beat up from the season, your strength is down, and then we'd work hard. And then by the time spring training, like late February, by the time I'm getting ready to head to minor league camp, I was doing 8. So it was kind of fun seeing that like 3-month progression, 4-month progression, and getting the strength built back up again. It was like clockwork. You just knew you're depleted, you build it back up, and then you're at full go for the beginning of the season. And now, things are different now.
I will say, so normally, like I have a pull-up bar in my house, and I use bands because I do sets of them. So like I'm ending up the day that I do pull-ups, I do like 100+ total. So I'm using the bands because there's no way I'm getting set. Like I'm not doing 100 but this was the first time that I'd done like non-assisted pull-ups at all for like a long time. So I had no idea how much I actually had in the tank until doing it for the Marine people. It's strange. They didn't immediately try and recruit me. I can only assume that the Marines are full currently.
They're full. Yeah. They didn't need you. Well, I'm impressed by you. I'm impressed by that, Sam. Very impressive. You did 16 after already doing, by the way, after doing a bunch earlier, like sometimes that depletes you, even in the same day. That depletes
it was like an hour later, though. It was
good time.
I don't think I was fatigued from the first set.
All right. So that's it for us today. We've got Thursday show, 10:30 a.m. Again, answer the poll. What time you think we should go live on all of our shows? Email us, check the mic at the33rdteam.com. We'll have some fun throughout this offseason. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. It's Pessimism show on Thursday. We'll see you again Thursday with more Check the Mic.